Chapter 34 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 34. Karen, during the 2 or 3 days that followed her strange conversation with Mrs. Talcott, felt that while she pitied and cared for Mrs. Talcott as she had never yet pitied and cared for her, she was also afraid of her. Mrs. Talcott had spoken no further word, and her eyes rested on her with no more than their customary steadiness. But Karen knew that there were many words she could speak. What were they? What was it that Mrs. Talcott knew? What secrets were they that she carried about in her lonely ancient heart? Mrs. Talcott loomed before her like a veiled figure of destiny, bearing an urn within which lay the ashes of dead hopes. Mrs. Talcott's eyes looked at her above the urn. It was always with them. When they gardened together, it was as if Mrs. Talcott set it down on the ground between them, and as if she took it up again with a sigh of fatigue. It was heavy when they turned to go. Karen felt herself tremble as she scrutinized the funereal shape. There was no refuge with Mrs. Talcott. Mrs. Talcott holding her urn was worse than the lonely fears. And for those 2 or 3 days of balmy, melancholy spring, the lonely fears did not press so closely. They wheeled far away against the blue. Tante was kinder to her and was more aware of her. She almost seemed a little ashamed of the scene with the piano. She spoke to Karen of it, flushing a little, explaining that she had slept badly, and that Karen's rendering of the Bach had made her nervous, emphasizing too the rule, new in its explicitness, that the grand piano was only to be played on by Karen when it was left open. You did not understand, but it is well to understand rules, is it not, my child? Said Madame von Marwitz, and this one, I know, you will not transgress again. Karen said that she understood. She had something of her rocky manner in receiving these implicit apologies and commands, yet her guardian could see an almost sick relief rising in her jaded young eyes. Other things were different. Tante seemed now to wish very constantly to have her there when Mr. Drew was with her. She made much of her to Mr. Drew. She called his attention to her skill in gardening, to her directness of speech, to her individuality of taste in dress. These expositions made Karen uncomfortable, yet they seemed an expression of Tante's desire to make amends. And Mr. Drew, with his vague, impenetrable regard, helped her to bear them. It was as if, a clumsy child, she were continually pushed forward by a fond, tactless mother, and as if, mildly shaking her hand, the guest before whom she was displayed showed her, by kind, inattentive eyes, that he was paying very little attention to her. Mr. Drew put her at her ease, and Tante embarrassed her. She became even a little grateful to Mr. Drew. But now, aware of this strange bond, it was more difficult to talk to him when they were alone, and when, once or twice, he met her in the garden or house, she made always an excuse to leave him. She and Mr. Drew could have nothing to say to each other when Tante was not there. One evening, returning to Les Solitudes after a walk along the cliffs, Karen found that tea was over, as she had intended that it should be, Tante and Mr. Drew not yet come in from their motoring, and Mrs. Talcott safely busied in the garden. There was not one of them with whom she could be happily alone, and she was glad to find the morning room empty. Mrs. Talcott had left the kettle boiling for her on the tea table, and the small teapot, which they used in their usual tete-a-tete, ready, and Karen made herself a cup. She was tired. She sat down, when she had her tea, near the window, and looked out over the ranged white flowers growing in their low white pots on the window seat, at the pale sea and sky. She sat quietly, her cheek on one hand, the other in her lap, and from time to time a great involuntary sigh lifted her breast. It seemed nearer peace than fear, this mood of immeasurable pale sorrow. It folded her round like the twilight falling outside. The room was dim when she heard the sound of the returning motor, and she sat on, believing that here she would be undisturbed. Tante rarely came to the morning room. But it was Tante who presently appeared, wearing still her motoring cloak and veil, the nun-like veil bound round her head. Karen thought, as she rose and looked at her, that she was like one of the ghost-like white flowers, and there was no joy for her in seeing her. She seemed to be part of the sadness. She turned and closed the door with some elaboration, and as she came nearer, Karen recognized in her eyes the piteous look of quelled watchfulness. "You are sitting here alone, my child?" she said, laying her hand, but for a moment only, on Karen's shoulder. Karen had resumed her seat, and Tante moved away at once to take up a vase of flowers from the mantelpiece, smell the flowers, and set it back. "Where is Tallie?" "Still in the garden, I think. I worked with her this morning, and before tea. Since tea I have had a walk." "Where did you walk?" Madame von Marwitz inquired, moving now over to the upright piano, and bending to examine, in the dusk, the music that stood on it. Karen described her route. "But it is lonely, very lonely for you, is it not?" Tante murmured after a moment's silence. Karen said nothing, and she went on. "And it will be still more lonely if, as I think probable, I must leave you here before long. I shall be going, perhaps to Italy." A sensation of oppression that she could not have analyzed passed over Karen. Why was Tante going to Italy? Why must she leave Les Solitudes? Her mind could not rest on the supposition that her own presence drove Tante forth, that the broken tête-à-tête was to be resumed under less disturbing circumstances. She could not ask Tante if Mr. Drew was to be in Italy, yet this was the question that pressed on her heart. "Oh, but I am very used to Les Solitudes," she said. "Used to it, yes, too used to it," said Madame von Marwitz, seating herself now near Karen, her eyes still moving about the room. "But it is not right, it is not fitting, that you should spend your youth here. That was not the destiny I had hoped for you. I came here to find you, Karen, so that I might talk to you." Her fingers slightly tapped her chair arm. "We must talk. We must see what is to be done." "Do you mean about me, Tante?" Karen asked after a moment. The look of the ghostly room and of the white enfolded figure seated before her with its restless eyes seemed part of the chill that Tante's words brought. "About you? Yes. About who else? Parbleu!" said Madame von Marwitz with a slight laugh, her eyes shifting about the room, and with a change of tone she added, "I have it on my heart, your situation, day and night. Something must be done, and I am prepared to do it." "To do what?" asked Karen. Her voice too had changed, but not, as Madame von Marwitz's, to a greater sweetness. "Well, to save it, the situation, to help you." Madame von Marwitz's ear was quick to catch the change. "And I have come, my Karen, to consult with you. It is a matter, many would say, for my pride to consider, but I will not count my pride. Your happiness, your dignity, your future are the things that weigh with me. I am prostrated, made ill, by the miserable affair. You see it. You see that I am not myself. I cannot sleep. It haunts me, you and your broken life. And what I have to propose," Tante looked down at her tapping fingers while she spoke, "is that I offer myself as intermediary. Your husband will not take the first step forward. So be it. I will take it. I will write to Mrs. Forrester. I will tell her that if your husband will but offer me the formal word of apology, I will myself induce you to return to him. What do you say, my Karen? Oh, to me, as you know, the forms are indifferent. It is of you and your dignity that I think. I know you. Without that apology from him to me, you could not contemplate a reconciliation. But he has now had his lesson, your young man, and when he knows that, through me, you would hold out the olive branch, he will, I predict, spring to grasp it. After all, he is in love with you, and has had time to find it out. And even if he were not, his mere man's pride must writhe to see himself abandoned. And you, too, have had your lesson, my poor Karen, and have seen that romance is a treacherous sand to build one's life upon. Dignity, fitness, one's rightful place in life, have their claims. You are one, as I told you, to work out your destiny in the world, not in the wilderness. What do you say, Karen? I would not write without consulting you. Hein, what is it? Karen had risen, and Madame von Marwitz's eyelashes fluttered a little in looking up at her. I will never forgive you. I will never forgive you, said Karen in a harsh voice, if you speak of this again. What is this that you say to me, Karen? Madame von Marwitz, too, rose. Never speak to me of this again, said Karen. In the darkening room they looked at each other as they had never in all their lives looked before. They were equals in maturity of demand. For a strange moment sheer fury struggled with subtler emotions in Madame von Marwitz's face, and then self-pity, overpowering, engulfing all else. "And is this the return you make me for my love?" she cried. Her voice broke in desperate sobs, and long-pent misery found relief. She sank into her chair. "I asked for no reconciliation," said Karen. "I left him, and we knew that we were parting forever. There is no love between us. Have you no understanding at all, and no thought of my pride?" It was woman addressing woman. The child Karen was gone. "Your pride," Madame von Marwitz repeated in her sobs. "And what of mine? Was it not for you, stony-hearted girl? Is it not your happiness I seek? If I had been mistaken in my hopes for you, is that a reason for turning upon me like a serpent?" Karen had walked to the long window that opened to the veranda and looked out, pressing her forehead to the pane. "You must forgive me if I was unkind. What you said burned me." "Ah, it is well for you to speak of burnings," Madame von Marwitz sobbed, aware that Karen's wrath was quelled. "I am scorched by all of you, she repeated incoherently. "All the burdens fall upon me, and, in reward, I am spurned and spat upon by those I seek to serve." "I am sorry, Tante. It was what you said, that you should think it possible." "Sorry, sorry. It is easy to say that you are sorry when you have rolled me in the dust of your insults and your ingratitude." Yet the sobs were quieter. "Let us say, then, that it has been misunderstanding," said Karen. She still stood in the window, but as she spoke the words, she drew back suddenly. She had found herself looking into Mr. Drew's eyes. His face, gazing in oddly upon her, was at the other side of the pane, and in the apparition, its suddenness, its pallor, rising from the dusk, there was something almost horrible. "Who is that?" came Tante's voice, as Karen drew away. She had turned in her chair. It seemed to Karen, then, that the room was filled with the whirring wings of wild emotions, caught and crushed together. Tante had sprung up, and came with long, swift strides to the window. She, too, pressed her face against the pane. "Ah, it is Claude," she said, in a hushed, strange voice, "and he did not see that I was here. What does he mean by looking in like that?" She spoke now angrily, drying her eyes as she spoke. She threw open the window. "Claude, come here." Mr. Drew, whose face seemed to have sunk, like a drowned face, back into dark water, returned to the threshold, and paused, arrested by his friend's wretched aspect. "Come in, enter," said Madame von Marwitz, with a withering stateliness of utterance. "You have the manner of a spy. Did you think that Karen and I were quarreling?" "I couldn't think that," said Mr. Drew, stepping into the room, for I didn't see that you were here." "We have had a misunderstanding," said Madame von Marwitz. "No more, and now we understand again. Is it not so, my Karen? You are going?" "I think I will go to my room," said Karen, who looked at neither Madame von Marwitz nor Mr. Drew. "You will not mind if I do not come to dinner tonight?" "Certainly not. No, do as you please. You are tired, I see it, and I too am tired." She followed Karen to the door, murmuring, "Sans raison, n'est-ce pas?" "Yes, Tante." As the door closed upon Karen, Madame von Marwitz turned to Mr. Drew. "If you wish to see her, why not seek her openly? Who makes it difficult for you to approach her?" Her voice had the sharpness of splintering ice. "Why, no one, ma chérie," said Mr. Drew. "I wasn't seeking her." "No? And what did it mean then, your face pressed close to hers, there at the window?" "It meant that I couldn't see who it was who stood there. Just as I can hardly now see more than that you are unhappy. What is the matter, my dear and beautiful friend?" His voice was solicitous. Madame von Marwitz dropped again into her chair, and leaning forward, her hands hanging clasped between her knees, she again wept. "The matter is the old one," she sobbed. "Ingratitude. Ingratitude on every hand. My crime now has been that I have sought, at the sacrifice of my own pride, to bring a reconciliation between that stubborn child and her husband, and for my reward she overwhelms me with abuse." "Tell me about it," said Mr. Drew, seating himself beside her and, unreproved, taking her hand. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 35. Karen did not go to her room. She was afraid that Mrs. Talcott would come to her there. She asked the cook for a few sandwiches, and going to one of the lower terraces, she found a seat there and sat down. She felt ill. Her mind was sore and vague. She sat leaning her head on her hand, as she had sat in the morning room, her eyes closed, and did not try to think. She had escaped something, mercifully. Yes, the supreme humiliation that Tante had prepared for her was frustrated. And she had been strangely hard and harsh to Tante, and, in return, Tante had been piteous, yet unmoving. Her heart was dulled toward Tante. She felt that she saw her from a great distance. The moon had risen and was shining brightly when she at last got up and climbed the winding paths up to the house. A definite thought, after the hours that she had sat there, had at last risen through the dull waters of her mind. Why should Tante go away? Why should not she herself go? There need be no affront to Tante, no alienation. But for a time at least, would it not be well to prove to Tante that she could be something more than a problem and a burden? Could she not go to the Lippheims in Germany and teach English and French and Italian there, she knew them all, and make a little money, and when Tante wanted her again to come to Les Solitudes, come as an independent person? It was a curious thought. It contradicted the assumptions upon which her life was founded. For was she not Tante's child, and Tante's home her home? So curious it was that she contemplated it like an intricate weapon laid in her hand, its oddity concealing its significance. She turned the weapon over. She might be Tante's child, and Tante's home might be hers. Yet a child could gain its own bread, could it not? What was there to pierce and shatter in the thought that it would be well for her to gain her bread? Tante has worked for me too long, she said to herself. She was not pierced or shattered. Something very strange was in her hand, but she was only reasonable. She had stood still in the midst of her swift climbing towards the house to think it all out clearly, and it was as she stood there that she saw the light of a cigarette approaching her. It was Mr. Drew, and he had seen her. Karen was aware of a deep stirring of displeasure and weariness. "But please," he said, as slightly bowing her head and murmuring, "Good night," she passed him. I very particularly want to see you." He turned to walk beside her, tossing away his cigarette. "There is something I particularly want to say." His tone was grave and kind and urgent. It reproached her impatient impulse. He might have come with a message from Tante. "Where is my guardian?" she asked. "She has gone to bed. She has a horrible headache, poor thing," said Mr. Drew, who was leading her through the little copse of trees and along the upper paths. "Here, shall we sit down here? You are not cold?" They were in the flagged garden. Karen, vaguely expectant, sat down on the rustic bench, and Mr. Drew sat beside her. The moonlight shone through the trees and fell fantastically on the young man's face and figure, and on Karen, sitting upright, her little shawl of white knitted wool drawn closely about her shoulders and enfolding her arms. "Not for long, please," she said. "It is growing late, and although I am not cold, I am tired. What have you to say, Mr. Drew?" He had so much to say, and it was so obviously his opportunity, his complete opportunity at last, that before the exquisite and perilous task of awakening this creature of flowers and glaciers, Mr. Drew collected his resources with something of the skill and composure of an artist preparing canvas and palette. He must begin delicately and discreetly, and then he must be sudden and decisive. "I want to make you feel, in the first place, if I can," he said, leaning forward to look into her face, and observing with satisfaction that she made no movement of withdrawal as he came a little nearer in doing so, "that I'm your friend. Can I, do you think, succeed in making you feel that?" His experience had told him that it really didn't matter so much what one said. To come near was the point, and to look deeply. "I've had so few chances of showing you how much your friend I am." "Thank you," said Karen. "You are kind." She did not say that he would succeed in making her feel him a friend. "We have been talking about you, talking a great deal since you left us, your guardian and I," Mr. Drew continued, and he looked at the one of Karen's hands that was visible, emerging from the shawl to clasp her elbow, the left hand with its wedding ring. "And ludicrous as it may seem to you, I can't but feel that I understand you a great deal better than she does. She still thinks of you as a child whose little problems can be solved by facile solutions. Forgive me, I know it may sound fatuous to you, but I see what she does not, that you are a suffering woman, and that for some problems there are no solutions." His eyes now came back to hers and found them fixed on him with a wide, astonished gaze. "Has my guardian asked you to say anything to me?" she said. "No, not exactly that," said Mr. Drew, a little disconcerted by her tone and look, while at the same time he was marvelling at the greater and greater beauty he found in the impassive moonlit face. How had he been so unconscionably stupid as not to see for so long how beautiful she was? "No, she certainly hasn't asked me to say anything to you. She is going away, you know, to Italy. It's a sudden decision, and she's been telling me about it. I can't go with her. I don't think it a good plan. I can stay on here, but I can't go to Italy. Perhaps she'll give it up. She didn't find me altogether sympathetic, and I'm afraid we've had something of a disagreement. I am sure you've seen, since you've been here, that if your guardian doesn't understand you, she doesn't understand me either." "But I cannot speak of my guardian to you," said Karen. She had kept her eyes steadily upon him waiting to hear what he might have to say. But now the thought of Tante in her rejected queenliness broke insufferably upon her, making her sick with pity. This man did not love Tante. She rose as she spoke. "Do not speak of her to me," she said. "But we will not speak of her. I do not wish to speak of her," said Mr. Drew, also rising, a stress of excitement and anxiety making itself felt in his soft, sibilant, hurried tones. "I understand every exquisite loyalty that hedges your path. And I'm hedged too. You see that. Wait, please listen. We won't speak of her. What I want to speak of is you. I want to ask you to make use of me. I want to ask you to trust me. You love her, but how can you depend on her? She is a child, an undisciplined, capricious child, and she is displeased with you, seriously displeased. Who is there in the world you can depend on? You are unutterably alone, and I ask you to turn to me." Her frosty scrutiny disconcerted him. He had not touched her in the least. "These are things you cannot say to me," she said. "There is nothing that you can do for me. I only know you as my guardian's friend. You forget that, I think, when you brought me here." She turned from him. "Oh, but you do not understand. I have made you angry. Oh, please, Mrs. Jardine." His voice rose to sharp distress. He caught her hand with a supplicating yet determined grasp. "You can't understand. You are so inconceivably unaware. It is because of you, all because of you. Haven't you really seen or understood? She can't forgive you because I love you. I love you, you adorable child. I have only stayed on and borne with her because of you." His passion flamed before her frozen face. And as, for a transfixed moment of stupor, she stood still, held by him, he read into her stillness the pause of the woman to whom the apple of the tree of life is proffered, amazed, afraid, yet thrilled through all her being, tempted by the very suddenness, incapable of swift repudiation. He threw his arms around her, taking, in a draught of delight, the impression of silvery, glacial loveliness that sent dancing stars of metaphor streaming in his head, and pressed his lips to her cheek. It was but one moment of attainment. The thrust that drove him from her was that, indeed, of the strong young goddess, implacable and outraged. Yet even as he read his deep miscalculation in her aspect, he felt that the moment had been worth it. Not many men, not even many poets, could say that they had held, in such a scene, on such a night, an unwilling goddess to their breast. She did not speak. Her eyes did not pause to wither. They passed over him. He had an image of the goddess wheeling to mount some chariot of the sky as, with no indignity of haste, she turned from him. She turned, and in the path, in the entrance to the flagged garden, Tante stood confronting them. She stood before them in the moonlight, with a majesty at once magnificent and ludicrous. She had come swiftly, borne on the wings of a devouring suspicion, and she maintained for a long moment her Medusa stare of horror. Then it was the ugliest thing that Karen had ever seen. The mask broke. Hatred, fury, malice, blind, atavistic passions distorted her face. It was to fall from one nightmare to another, and a worse. For Tante seized her by the shoulders, and shook and shook and shook her, till the blood sprang and rang in her ears and eyeballs, and her teeth chattered together, and her hair, loosened by the great jerks, fell down upon her shoulders and about her face. And while she shook her, Tante snarled, seeming to crush the words between her grinding teeth. "Ah, perfide, perfide, perfide!" From behind, other hands grasped Karen's shoulders. Mr. Drew grappled with Tante for possession of her. "Leave me, with my guardian," she gathered her broken breath to say. She repeated it, and Mr. Drew, invisible to her, replied, "I can't. She'll tear you to pieces." "Ah, you have still to hear from me." "Vile seducer!" Madame von Marwitz cried, addressing the young man over Karen's shoulder. "Do you dare dispute my right to save her from you? Foul serpent! Leave us! Does she not tell you to leave us?" "I'll see her safely out of your hands before I leave her," said Mr. Drew. "How dare you speak of perfidy when you saw her repulse me? You'd have found it easier to forgive, no doubt, if she hadn't." These insolent words, hurled at it, convulsed the livid face that fronted Karen, and suddenly, holding Karen's shoulders and leaning forward, Madame von Marwitz broke into tears, horrible tears. In all her life Karen had never pitied her as she pitied her then, sobbing with raking breaths. "No, no, it is too much. Have I not loved him with a saintly love, seeking to uplift what would draw me down? Has he not loved me? Has he not sought to be my lover? And he can spit upon me in the dust." She raised her head. "Did you believe me blind, infatuated? Did you think by your tricks and pretenses to evade me? Did I not see, from the moment that she came, that your false heart had turned from me?" Her eyes came back to Karen's face, and fury again seized her. "And as for you, ungrateful girl, perfidious, yes, and insolent one, you deserve to be denounced to the world. Oh, we understand those retreats. What more alluring to the man who pursues than the woman who flees? What more inflaming than the pose of white, idiotic innocence? You did not know. You did not understand." Fiercely, in a mincing voice, she mimicked a supposed exculpation. "You are so young, so ignorant of life, so immer kindlich. Ah," she laughed, half strangled, "until the man seizes you in his arms you are quite unaware, but quite, quite unaware of what he seeks from you. Little fool! And more than fool, have I not seen your wiles? From day to day have I not watched you? Now it is the piano. You must play him your favourite little piece. So small, you have so little talent, but you will do your best. Now the chance meeting in the garden. You are so fond of flowers. You so love the open air, the sea, the wandering on the cliffs. Such a free, wild creature you are. And now we have the frustrated rendezvous of this evening. He should find you dreaming among your flowers in the dusk. The pretty picture. And no, you want no dinner. You will go to your own room. But you are not to be found in your own room. Oh no, it is again the garden. The moon, the sea and solitude that you seek. Be silent." This was almost shouted at Claude Drew, who broke in with savage denials. "Do you think still to impose on me, you traitor? No." Her eyes burned on Karen's face. "No, you are wiser. You do not speak. You know that the time for insolence has passed. What? You take refuge with me here? You fly from your husband and throw yourself on my hands and say to me," again she assumed the mincing tones, "yes, here I am again. Continue, pray, to work for me. Continue, pray, to clothe and feed and lodge me. Continue to share your life with me and all of the rich and wide and brilliant it can offer. Continue, in a word, to hold me high, but very high, above the gutter from which I came. And I take you, I receive you in my arms, I shelter you from malicious tongues, I humble myself in seeking to mend your shattered life, and for my reward you steal from me the heart of the one creature in the world I loved, the one, the only one. Until you came he was mine. Until you came he yearned for me, only for me. Oh, my heart is broken, broken, broken." She leaned forward, wildly sobbing, and raising herself she shook the girl with all her force, crying, "Out of my sight! Be off! Let me see no more of you!" Covering her face with her hands, she reeled back, and Karen fled down the path, hearing a clamor of sobs and outcries behind her. She fled along the cliff path, and an incomparable horror was in her soul. Her life had been struck from her. It seemed a ghost that ran, watched by the moon, among the trees. On the open cliff path it was very light. The sky was without a cloud. The sea lay like a vast cloth of silk, diapered in silver. Karen ran to where the path led to a rocky verge. From here, in daylight, one looked down into a vast hollow in the coast, and saw at the bottom, far beneath, a stony beach, always sad and set with rocks. Tonight the enormous cup was brimmed with blackness. Karen, pausing and leaning forward, resting on her hands, stared across the appalling gulf of inky dark, and down into the nothingness. Horror had driven her to the spot, and horror, like a presence, rose from the void, and beckoned her down to oblivion. Why not? Why not? The question of despair seemed, like a vast pendulum, to swing her to and fro, between the sky and the blackness, so that, blind and deaf and dumb, she felt only the horror, and her own pulse of life suspended over annihilation. And while her fingers clutched tightly at the rock, the thought of Gregory's face, as it had loved her, dimly, like a far beacon, flashed before her. Their love was dead. He did not love her. But they had loved. She moved back, trembling. She did not want to die. She lay down with her face to the ground on the grassy cliff. When she raised herself, it was as if after a long slumber. She was immensely weary, with leaden limbs. Horror was spent, but a dull oppression urged her up and on. There was something that she must never see again, something that would open before her again the black abyss of nothingness, something like the moon that once had lived, but was now a ghost, white, ghastly, glittering. She must go. At once, and, as if far away, a tiny picture rose before her of some little German town where she might earn a living and be hidden and forgotten. But first she must see Mrs. Talcott. She must say goodbye to Mrs. Talcott. There was nothing now that Mrs. Talcott could show her. She went back softly and carefully, pausing to listen, pushing through unused, overgrown paths, and among thickets of gorse and stunted Cornish elms. In the garden all was still. The dreadful clamour had ceased. By the back way she stole up to her room. A form rose to meet her as she opened the door. Mrs. Talcott had been waiting for her. Taking her hand, Mrs. Talcott drew her in and closed the door. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 36. Mrs. Talcott sat down on the bed, and Karen knelt before her with her head in her lap. The old woman's hands passed quietly over her hair while she wept, and the homely gentleness, like the simplicity of milk to famished lips, flowed into her horror-haunted mind. She tried to tell Mrs. Talcott what had happened. "She does not love me, Mrs. Talcott. She has turned me out. Tante has told me to go." "I've seen her," said Mrs. Talcott, stroking on. "I was just going out to look for you, if you didn't come in. Did she tear your hair down like this? It's all undone." "It was when she shook me, Mrs. Talcott. She found me with Mr. Drew. He had kissed me. I could not help it. She knew that I could not help it. She knows that I am not a bad woman." "You mustn't take Mercedes at her word when she's in a state like that, Karen. She's in an awful state. She's parted from that young man." "And I am going, Mrs. Talcott." "Well, I've wanted you to go from the first. Now you've found her out. This ain't any place for you. You can't go hanging on for all your life, like I've done." "But Mrs. Talcott, what does it mean? What have I found out? What is Tante?" Karen sobbed. For all these years so beautiful to me, and suddenly to become my enemy, someone I do not know. You never got in her way before. She's got no mercy, Mercedes hasn't, if you get in her way. Where'd you thought of going, Karen?" "To Frau Lippheim. She is still in London, I think. I could join her there. You could lend me a little money, Mrs. Talcott, enough to take me to London." Mrs. Talcott was silent for a moment. "Come up here on the bed, Karen," she then said. "Here, wrap this cloak around you. You're awful cold. That's right. Now I want you to sit quiet while I explain things to you the best I can. I've made up my mind to do it. Mercedes will be in her right mind tomorrow and frantic to get hold of you again and get you to forgive her. Oh, I know her. And I don't want her to get hold of you again. I want you to be quit of her. I want you to see, as clear as day, how your husband was right about Mercedes all along." "Oh, do not speak of him," Karen moaned, covering her face as she sat on the bed beside Mrs. Talcott. "I ain't goin' to speak about him. I'm going to tell you about me and Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott. "I'm going to explain Mercedes, and I'm going way back to the very beginning to do it." "Explain it to me. What is she? Has it all been false? All her loveliness?" "I don't know about faults," said Mrs. Talcott. "Mercedes ain't all bad, not by a long shot. She feels good sometimes, like most folks, when it ain't too much trouble. You know how it began, Karen. You know how I'm a sort of connection of Mercedes's mother, and I've told you about Dolores. The prettiest creature you ever set eyes on. Mercedes looks like her, only it was a softer face than Mercedes, with great big black eyes. I can see her now, walking around the galleries of that lovely house in New Orleans with a big white camellia in her black hair and a white muslin dress standing out round her, like they wore then, singing, so young and happy it almost breaks my heart to think about her. I've told you about Mercedes's father, too, Pavelek Okraski, and how he came out to New Orleans and gave lessons to Dolores Bastida and made love to her on the sly and got her to run away with him. Poor silly thing. When I think it all over, I seem to piece things out and see how Mercedes came to be what she is. Her mother was just as sweet and loving as could be, but scatterbrained and hot-tempered. And Pavelek was a mighty mean man, and a mighty bad man, too, a queer, tricky, sly sort of man, but geniusy, with very attractive manners. Mercedes has got his eyes and his way of laughing. She shows her teeth just like he used to do when he laughed. Well, he took Dolores off to Poland and spent all her money as fast as he could get it. And then Signor Bastida and the two boys, nice, hot-tempered boys they were, and perfect pictures, all got killed in a vendetta they had with another family in Louisiana. And poor Signora Bastida got sick and died, and all the family fortunes went to pieces, and there was no more home and no more money either for Dolores. She just lost everything straight off. She sent for me then. Her baby was coming, and Pavelek had gone off, and she didn't know where he was, and she was about distracted. I'd been married before she ran away with Pavelek, but Homer only lived 4 years, and I was a widow then. I had folks left still in Maine, but no one very near, and there wasn't anybody I seemed to take to so much as I always had to Dolores. You may say she had a sort of fascination for me. So I sold out what I had and came. My, what a queer journey that was. I don't know how I got to Krakow. I only spoke English, and traveling wasn't what it is nowadays. But I got there somehow, and found that poor child. She was the wretchedest creature you ever set eyes on, thin as thin, and all haggard and wild. Pavelek neglected her, and ran after other women, and drank, and when he got drunk, and she used to fly out at him, for she was as hot-tempered as she could be, he used to beat her. Yes, that man used to beat Dolores." A note of profound and enduring anger was in Mrs. Talcott's voice. "He came back after I got there. I guess he thought I'd brought some money, and he came in drunk one day and tried to hit her before me. He didn't ever try it again after that. I just got up and struck him with all my might and main right in the face, and he fell down and hurt his head pretty bad, and Dolores began to shriek and said I'd killed her husband. But he didn't try it again. He was sort of scared of me, I guess. No, I ain't forgiven Pavelek Okraski yet, and I reckon I never shall. I don't seem to want to forgive him, neither in this world nor the next, if there is a next," Mrs. Talcott commented. Well, the time for the baby came, and on the day Mercedes was born, the Austrians bombarded Krakow. It was in '48. I took Dolores down to the cellar, and all day long we heard the shells bursting, and the people screeching. And that was the time Mercedes came into the world. Dolores most died, but she got through. But afterwards I couldn't get proper care for her, or food either. She just pined off, and died 5 months after the baby came. Pavelek most went off his head. He was always fond of her in his own mean way, and I guess he suffered considerable when she died. He went off, saying he'd send some money for me and the baby, but precious little of it did I ever see. I made some by sewing and giving lessons in English. I reckon some of those young Poles got queer ways of speaking from me. I was never what you'd call a polished speaker, and I scraped on. Time and time again we were near starving. My, that little garret room and that big church, Panna Maria they called it, where I'd go and sit with the baby when the services were on to see if I could keep warm in the crowd. And the big fire in '50 when I carried the baby out in a field with lots of other people and slept out. It lasted for 10 days, that fire. It seems like a dream sometimes, all that time, Mrs. Talcott mused, and the distant sorrow of her voice was like the blowing of a winter wind. It seems like a dream to think I got through with the child alive, and that my sweet, pretty little Dolores went under. There's some things that don't bear thinking about. Well, I kept that baby warm, and I kept it fat, and it got to be the prettiest, proudest thing you ever set eyes on. She might have been a queen from the very beginning. And as for Pavelek, she just ruled him from the time she began to have any sense. It was mighty queer to see that man, who had behaved so bad to her mother, cringing before that child. He doted on her, and she didn't care a button for him. It used to make me feel almost sorry for Pavelek sometimes. She'd look at him, when he tried to please her and amuse her, like he was a performing dog. It kept Pavelek in order, I can tell you, and made things easier for me. She'd just say she wanted things, and if she didn't get them straight off, she'd go into a black rage, and he'd be scared out of his life, and go and work and get 'em for her. And then she began to show she was a prodigy. Pavelek taught her the violin first, and then the piano, and when he realized she was a genius, he most went off his head with pride. Why, that man, the selfishest, laziest creature by nature, worked himself to skin and bone so that she should have the best lessons and everything she needed. We both held our noses to the grindstone, just as tight as ever we could, and Mercedes was brought up pretty well, I think, considering. She gave that first concert in Warsaw. We'd moved to Warsaw, and then Pavelek seemed to go to pieces. He just drank himself to death. Well, after that, rich relations of Mercedes turned up, cousins of the Bastidas, who lived in Paris. They hadn't lifted a finger to help Dolores or me with the baby after Dolores died. But they remembered about us now Mercedes was famous, and made us come to live with them in Paris, and said they had first claim on Mercedes. I didn't take to the Bastidas, but I stayed on because of Mercedes. I got to be a sort of nurse for her, you may say. Well, as she got older and prettier, and everyone just crazy about her, I saw she didn't have much use for me. I didn't judge her too hard, but I began to see through her then. She'd behaved mighty bad to me again and again. She used to fly at me and bite me and tear my hair when she was a child if I thwarted her, but I always believed she really loved me. Perhaps she did, as much as she can, but after these rich folks turned up and her life got so bright and easy, she just seemed to forget all about me. So I went home. I stayed home for 4 or 5 years, and then Mercedes sent for me. She used to write now and then to her dearest Tallie, as she always called me, and I'd heard all about how she'd come out in Paris and Vienna as a great pianist, and how she'd quarreled with her relations, and how she'd run away with a young English painter and got married to him. It was an awful silly match, and they'd all opposed it, but it pleased me somehow. I thought it showed that Mercedes was soft-hearted like her mother, and unworldly. Well, she wrote that she was miserable, and that her husband was a fiend, and broke her heart, and that she hated all her relations, and they'd all behaved like serpents to her. Mercedes is always running across serpents. And how I was the only true friend she had, and the only one who understood her, and how she longed for her dear Tallie. So I sold out again. I just started a sort of little farm near the old place in Maine, raising chickens and making jam, and came over again. I don't know what it is about Mercedes, but she gets a hold over you. And guess I always felt like she was my own baby. I had a baby, but it died when it was born. Well, she was living in Paris then, and they had a fine flat and a big studio, and when Mercedes got into a passion with her husband, she'd take a knife and slash up his canvases. She quarreled with him day and night, and I wasn't long with them before I saw that it was all her fault, and that he was a weak, harmless sort of young creature. He had yellow hair, longish, and used to wear a black velvet cap and paint sort of dismal pictures of girls with long necks and wild sort of eyes, but that the truth was she was sick of him and wanted to marry the Baron von Marwitz. You can commence to get hold of the story now, Karen. You remember the Baron, a sad, stately man he was, as cultured and intellectual as could be, and going in the best society. Mercedes had found pretty quick that there wasn't much fun in being married to a yellow-haired boy who lived on the money she made and wasn't a mite in society. And the Baron was just crazy over her in his dignified, reverential way. "Poor fellow," said Mrs. Talcott, pausing in a retrospect over this vanished figure. "Poor fellow. I guess he came to rue the day he ever set eyes on her." Well, Mercedes made out to him how terrible her life was, and how she was tied to a dissipated, worthless man who lived on her and was unfaithful to her. And it's true that Baldwin Tanner behaved as he shouldn't. But he was a weak creature, and she'd disillusionized him so and made him so miserable that he just got reckless. And he'd never asked any more than to live in a garret with her and adore her, and paint his lanky people, and eat bread and cheese. He told me so, poor boy. He just used to lay his head down on my lap and cry like a baby sometimes. But Mercedes made it out that she was a victim, and he was a serpent, and she believed it too. That's the power of her. She's just determined to be in the right always. So at last she made it all out. She couldn't divorce Baldwin, being a Catholic, but she made it out that she wasn't really married to him. It appears he didn't get baptized by his folks. They hadn't believed in baptizing. They were free thinkers. And the Baron got his powerful friends to help, and they all set to work at the Pope, and they got him to fix it up. And Mercedes' marriage was annulled, and she was free to marry again. That's what was in her mind in sending for me, you see. She'd quarreled with her folks, and she wanted a steady, respectable person who knew all about her to stand by her and chaperone her while she was getting rid of Baldwin. Mercedes has always been pretty careful about her reputation. She's hardly ever taken any risks. Well, she was free, and she married the Baron, and poor Baldwin got a nice young English girl to marry him, and she reformed him, and they're alive and happy to this day. And I guess he paints pretty poor pictures. And it makes Mercedes awful mad to hear about how happy they are. She has a sort of idea, I imagine, that Baldwin didn't have any right to get married again. I've always had a good deal of satisfaction over Baldwin," said Mrs. Talcott. "It's queer to realize that Mercedes was once just plain Mrs. Baldwin Tanner, ain't it? It was a silly match, and no mistake. Well, it took 2 or 3 years to work it all out, and Mercedes was 25 when she married the Baron. I didn't see much of them for a while. They put me around in their houses to look after things and be there when Mercedes wanted me. She'd found out she couldn't get along without me in those 2 or 3 years. Mercedes was the most beautiful creature alive at that time, I do believe, and all Europe was wild about her. She and the Baron went about, and she gave concerts, and it was just a triumphal tour. But after a spell I began to see that things weren't going smooth. Mercedes is the sort of person who's never satisfied with what she's got. And the Baron was beginning to find her out. My, I used to be sorry for that man. I'll never forget his white, sick face the first time she flew out at him and made one of her scenes. Impressionnez ma jeunesse, Mrs. Talcott quoted with a heavy accent. That's what she said he'd done to her. He was 20 years older than Mercedes, the Baron. Mercedes always liked to have men who were in love with her hanging about, and that's what the trouble was over. The more they cared, the worse she treated them, and the Baron was a very dignified man and didn't like having them around. And she was dreadful jealous of him too, and used to fly out at him if he so much as looked at another woman. In her way, I guess he was the person Mercedes cared for most in all her life. She respected him too, and she knew he was as clever as she was, and more so. And as for him, in spite of everything, he always stayed in love with her. They used to have reconciliations, and when he'd look at her sort of scornful and loving and sad all together, it would make her go all to pieces. She'd throw herself in his arms and cry and cry. No, she ain't all bad, Mercedes. And she thought she could make things all right with him after she'd let herself go. She depended on his caring for her so much and being sorry for her. But I saw well enough as the years went on that he got more and more depressed. He was a depressed man, by nature, I reckon, and he read a sight of philosophy of the gloomy kind. That writer Schopenhauer was a favourite of his, I recollect, and Mercedes thought a sight of him too. And after 10 years or so of Mercedes, I expect the Baron was pretty sick of life. Well, you came. You thought it was Mercedes who was so good to you, and it was in a way, but it was poor Ernst who really cared. He took to you the moment he set eyes on you, and he'd liked your father, and he wanted to have you live with them and be their adopted daughter, and inherit their money when they died. It had always been a grief to him that Mercedes wouldn't have any children. She just had a horror of having children, and he had to give up any hope of it. Well, the moment Mercedes realized how he cared for you, she got jealous, and they had a scene over you right off, in that hotel at Fontainebleau. She took on like her heart would break, and put it that she couldn't bear to have any one with them for good, she loved him so. It was true in a way. I didn't count, of course. He looked at her, sick and scornful and loving, and he gave way. That was why you were put to school. She tried to make up by being awful nice to you when you came for your holidays now and then, but she never liked having you round much, and Ernst saw it and never showed how much he cared for you. But he did care. You had a real friend in him, Karen. Well, after that came the worst thing Mercedes ever did. Mrs. Talcott paused, gazing before her in the dimly lighted room. Poor things! Poor Mercedes! It nearly killed her. She's never been the same since. And it was all her fault, and she knows it. And that's why she's afraid. That's why, she added in a lower voice, you're sorry for her and put up with everything, because you know she's a miserable woman and it wouldn't do for her to be alone. A young man turned up. His name don't matter now, poor fellow. He was just a clever, all-over-the-place young man, like so many of them, thinking they know more about everything than God Almighty. Like this young man in a way, only not a bad young man like him. And downright sick with love of Mercedes. He followed her about all over Europe, and went to every concert she gave, and laid himself out to please her in all the ways he could. And he had a great charm of manner. He was a Russian and very high bred, and he sort of fascinated her, and she liked it all, I can tell you. Her youth was beginning to go, and the Baron was mighty gloomy, and she just basked in this young man's love, and pretty soon she began to think she was in love with him. Perhaps she was, and had never loved before, and she certainly worked herself up to suffer considerably. Well, the Baron saw it. He saw she didn't treat him the way she'd treated the others. She was kind of humble and tender and distracted all the time. The Baron saw it all, but she never noticed that he was getting gloomier and gloomier. I sometimes wonder if things might have been different if he'd been willing to confide in me some. It does folks a sight of good if there's someone they can tell things to. But the Baron was very reserved, and never said a word. And at last she burst out with a dreadful scene. You were with them. Yes, it was that summer at Felsenschloss. But you didn't know anything about it, of course. I was pretty much in the thick of it all, as far as Mercedes went, and I tried to make her see reason, and told her she was a sinful woman to treat her husband so. But I couldn't hold her back. She broke out at him one day, and told him he was like a jailer to her, and that he suffocated her talent, and that he hung on her like a vampire, and sucked her youth, and that she loved the other man. I can see her now, rushing up and down that long saloon on that afternoon, with the white blinds drawn down, and the sun filtering through them, snatching with her hands at her dress, and waving her arms up and down in the air. And the Baron sat on a sofa, leaning on his elbow, with his hand up over his eyes, and watched her under it. And he didn't say one word. When she fell down on another sofa, and cried, he got up and looked at her for a moment. But it wasn't the scornful, loving look. It was a queer, dark, dead way, and he just went out, and we never saw him alive again. You know the rest, Karen. You found him. But no one knows why he did it. No one but you and me. He put an end to himself because he couldn't stand it any longer, and to set her free. They called it suicidal mania, and the doctor said he must have had melancholia for years. But I shan't ever forget his face when he went out, and no more will Mercedes. After he was gone, she thought she'd never care for anything in the world but him. She never saw that young man again. She wrote him a letter and laid the blame on him, and said he'd tried to take her from her adored husband, and that she'd never forgive him, and loathed the thought of him, and that he had made her the most wretched of women. And he went and blew his brains out, and that was the end of him. I had considerable difficulty in getting hold of that letter. It was on him when he killed himself. But I managed to talk over the police and hush it up. Mercedes gave me plenty of money to manage with. I don't know what she thinks about that poor fellow. She's never named his name since that day. And she went on like a mad thing for 2 years or more. You remember about that, Karen. She said she'd never play the piano again or see anybody, and wanted to go and be a nun. But she had a friend who was a prioress of a convent, and she advised her not to. I guess poor Mercedes wouldn't have stayed long in a convent. And the reason she was nice to you was because the Baron had been fond of you, and she wanted to make up all she could for that dreadful thing in her life. She had you to come and live with her. You didn't interfere with anything any longer, and it sort of soothed her to think it was what he'd have liked. She's fond of you, too. She wouldn't have put up with you for so long if she hadn't been. She'd have found some excuse for being quit of you. But as for loving you, Karen, child, like you thought she did, or like you love her, why, it's pitiful. I used to wonder how long it would be before you found her out." Karen's face was hidden. She had rested it upon her hands, leaning forward, her elbows on her knees, and she had not moved while Mrs. Talcott told her story. Now, as Mrs. Talcott sat silent, she stirred slightly. "Tante, Tante," she muttered, "my beautiful." Mrs. Talcott did not reply to this for some moments. Then she laid her hand on Karen's shoulder. "That's it," she said. "She's beautiful, and it most kills us to find out how cruel and bad she can be. But I guess we can't judge people like Mercedes, Karen. When you go through life like a mowing machine and see everyone flatten out before you, you must get kind of exalted ideas about yourself. If anything happens that makes a hitch, or if anybody don't flatten out, why it must seem to you as if they were wrong in some way, doing you an injury. That's the way it is with Mercedes. She don't mean to be cruel. She don't mean to be bad. But she's a mowing machine, and if you get in her way, she'll cut you up, fine, and leave you behind. And the thing for you to do, Karen, is to get out of her way as quick as you can." "Yes, I am going," said Karen. Again Mrs. Talcott sat silent. "I'd like to talk to you about that, Karen," she then said. "I want to ask you to give up going to Frau Lippheim. There ain't any sense in that. It's a poor plan. What you ought to do, Karen, is to go right back to your nice young husband." Karen, who sat on as if crushed beyond the point where anything could crush her further, shook her head. "Do not ask me that, Mrs. Talcott," she said. "I can never go back to him." "But Karen, I guess you've got to own now that he was right and you were wrong in that quarrel of yours. I guess you'll have to own that it must have made him pretty sick to see her putting him in the wrong with you all the time and spoiling everything. And there's no one on earth can do that better than Mercedes." "I see it all," said Karen. "But that does not change what happened between Gregory and me. He does not love me. I saw it plainly. If he had me back, it would only be because he cares for conventions. He said cruel things to me." "I guess you said cruel things to him, Karen." Karen shook her head slightly, with weariness rather than impatience. "No, for he saw that it was my loyalty to her, my love of her, that he was wounding. And he never understood. He never helped me. I can never go back to him, for he does not love me." "Now, see here, Karen," said Mrs. Talcott after a pause. "You just let me work it out. You'll have a good sleep, and tomorrow morning I'll see you off, before Mercedes is up, to a nice little farm near here that I know about, just a little way by train, and there you'll stay, nice and quiet, and I'll not let Mercedes know where you are. And I'll write to Mr. Jardine and tell him just what's happened and what you meant to do, and that you want to go to Frau Lippheim. And mark my words, Karen, that nice young husband of yours will be here quicker than you can say Jack Robinson." Karen had dropped her hands and was looking at her old friend intently. "Mrs. Talcott, you do not understand," she said. "You cannot write to him. Have I not told you that he does not love me?" "Shucks!" said Mrs. Talcott. "He'll love you fast enough, now that Mercedes is out of the way." "But Mrs. Talcott," said Karen, rising and looking down at the old woman, whose face, in the dim light, had assumed to her reeling mind an aspect of dangerous infatuation, "I do not think you know what you are saying. What do I want of a man who only loves me when I cease to love my guardian?" "Well, say you give up love then," Mrs. Talcott persisted, and a panic seized Karen as she heard the unmoved tones. "Say you don't love him and he don't love you. You can have conventions then. He wants that, you say, and so can you. And a good home and a nice husband who won't treat you bad in any way. That's better than batting about the world all by yourself, Karen. You take my word for it. And you can take my word for it, too, that if you behave sensible and do as I say, you'll find out that all this is just a miserable mistake, and that he loves you just as much as ever. Now, see here," Mrs. Talcott also had risen and stood in her habitual attitude, resting heavily on one hip. You're not fit to talk, and I'm not going to worry you any more. You go to sleep, and we'll see about what to do tomorrow. You go to sleep, Karen." She patted the girl's shoulder. The panic was deepening in Karen. She saw guile on Mrs. Talcott's storm-beaten and immutable face, and she heard specious reassurance in her voice. Mrs. Talcott was dangerous. She had set her heart on this last desire of her passionless, impersonal life, and had determined that she and Gregory should come together again. It was this desire that had unsealed her lips. She would never relinquish it. She might write to Gregory. She might appeal to him, and put before him the desperate plight in which his wife was placed. And he might come. What were a wife's powers if she were homeless and penniless, and a husband claimed her? Karen did not know, but panic breathed upon her, and she felt that she must fly. She too could use guile. "Yes," she said, "I will go to sleep, and tomorrow we will talk. But what you hope cannot be. Good night, Mrs. Talcott." "Good night, child," said Mrs. Talcott. They had joined hands, and the strangeness of this farewell, the knowledge that she might never see Mrs. Talcott again, and that she was leaving her to a life empty of all that she had believed it to contain, rose up in Karen so strongly that it blotted out for a moment her own terror. "You have been so good to me," she said, in a trembling voice. "Never shall I forget what you have done for me, Mrs. Talcott. May I kiss you good night?" They had never kissed. Mrs. Talcott's eyes blinked rapidly, and a curious contortion puckered her mouth and chin. Karen thought that she was going to cry, and her own eyes filled with tears. But Mrs. Talcott in another moment had mastered her emotion, or more probably it could find no outlet. The silent, stoic years had sealed the fount of weeping. Only that dry contortion of her face spoke of her deep feeling. Karen put her arms around her, and they kissed each other. "Good night, child," Mrs. Talcott then said in a muffled voice, and disengaging herself, she went out quickly. Karen stood listening to the sound of her footsteps passing down the corridor. They went down the little flight of stairs that led to another side of the house and faded away. All was still. She did not pause or hesitate. She did not seem to think. Swiftly and accurately she found her walking shoes and put them on, her hat and cloak, her purse with its half-crown, its sixpence, and its few coppers. Swiftly she laid together a change of underwear, and took from her dressing-table its few toilet appurtenances. She paused then, looking at the ornaments of her girlhood. She must have money. She must sell something. Yet all these her guardian had given her. No, not all. Her little gold watch ticked peacefully, lying on the table beside her bed, as it had lain beside her for so many years. Her beautiful little watch, treasured by her since the distant birthday when Onkel Ernst had given it. She clutched it tightly in her hand, and it seemed to her, as she had once said to Gregory, that the iron drove deep into her heart, and turned up not only dark forgotten things, but dark and dreadful things never seen before. She leaned against the table, putting the hand that held Onkel Ernst's watch to her eyes, and his agony became part of her own. How he had suffered! And the other man, the young, forgotten Russian. Mrs. Talcott's story became real to her as it had not yet been. It entered her. It filled her past. It linked itself with everything that she had been and done and believed. And the iron drove down deeper until of her heart there seemed only to be left a deep black hole. End of chapter 36. Chapter 37 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 37. Mrs. Talcott had a broken night, and it was like a continuation of some difficult and troubled dream when she heard the voice of Mercedes saying to her, "Tallie, Tallie, wake up! Tallie, will you wake? Bon Dieu! How she sleeps!" The voice of Mercedes, when she had heard it last, had been the voice of passion and desperation, but its tone was changed this morning. It was fretful, feverishly irritable, rather than frantic. Mrs. Talcott opened her eyes and sat up in bed. She wore a Jaeger nightgown, and her head, with its white hair coiled at the top, was curiously unaltered by its informal setting. "What do you mean by coming waking me up like this after the night you've given me?" she demanded, fully awakened now. "Go right straight away, or I'll put you out." "Don't be a fool, Tallie," said Madame von Marwitz, who, in a silken dressing gown and with her hair unbound, had an appearance at once childish and damaged. "Where is Karen? I've been to her room, and she is not there. The door downstairs is unbolted. Is she gone out to walk so early?" Mrs. Talcott sat still and upright in her bed. "What time is it?" she asked. "It is 7. I have been awake since dawn. Do you imagine that I have had a pleasant night?" Mrs. Talcott did not answer this query. She sprang out of bed. "Perhaps she's gone to meet the bus at the crossroads. But I told her I was going to take her. Tell Burton to come round with the car as quick as he can. I'll go after her and see that she's all right. Why, the child hasn't got any money," Mrs. Talcott muttered, deftly drawing on her clothes beneath her nightgown, which she held by the edge of the neck between her teeth. Madame von Marwitz listened to her impeded utterance, frowning. "The bus? What do you mean? Why is she meeting the bus?" "To take her to London, where she's going to the Lippheims," said Mrs. Talcott, casting aside the nightgown and revealing herself in chemise and petticoat. "You go and order that car, Mercedes," she added, as she buckled together her sturdy, widely waisted stays. "This ain't no time for talk." Madame von Marwitz looked at her for another moment and then rang the bell. She put her head outside the door to await the housemaid, and as this person made some delay, shouted in a loud voice, "Hancock! Jane! Louise! Where are you? Fainéantes!" She stamped her foot, and as the housemaid appeared, running, "Burton," she commanded, "the car, at once, and tell Louise to bring me my tea-gown, my shoes and stockings, my fur cloak, at once, but at once! Make haste!" "What are you up to, Mercedes?" Mrs. Talcott inquired, as Madame von Marwitz thrust her aside from the dressing table and began to wind up her hair before the mirror. "I am getting ready to go with you, parbleu!" Madame von Marwitz replied. "Is that you, Louise? Come in. You have the things? Put on my shoes and stockings, quickly. Mais dépêchez-vous donc. The tea-gown, yes. Over this. Over it, I say. So. Now bring me a motor veil and gloves. I shall do thus." Mrs. Talcott, while Louise, with an air of profoundest gloom, arrayed her mistress, kept silence, but when Louise had gone in search of the motor veil, she remarked in a low but imperative voice, "You'll get out at the roadside and wait for me. That's what you'll do. I won't have you along when I meet Karen. She couldn't bear the sight of you." "Peace," Madame von Marwitz commanded, adjusting the sash of her tea-gown. "I shall see Karen. The deplorable misunderstanding of last night shall be set right. Her behaviour has been undignified and underhanded, but I misunderstood her, and, pierced to the heart by the treachery of a man I trusted, I spoke wildly, without thought. Karen will understand. I know my Karen." It was not the moment for dispute. Louise had re-entered with the veil, and Madame von Marwitz bound it about her head, standing before the mirror and gazing at herself fixedly and unseeingly, with dark eyes set in purpled orbits. She turned then and swept from the room, and Mrs. Talcott, pinning on her hat as she went, followed her. Not until they were speeding through the fresh, chill air did Mrs. Talcott speak. Madame von Marwitz, leaning to one side of the open car, scanned the stretch of road before them melancholy and monotonous under the pale morning sky, and Mrs. Talcott, moving round determinedly in her corner, faced her. "I want to tell you right now, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, "that Karen's done with you. There's no use in your coming, for you'll never get her back. I've told her all about you, Mercedes. Yes, I ain't afraid of you, and you know it. I told her. I made up my mind to it last night, after I'd seen you and heard all your shameful story and how you'd treated her. I made up my mind that you shouldn't get hold of her again, not if I could help it. The time had come to tell that child that her husband was right all along, and that you ain't a woman to be trusted. She'd seen for herself what you could do, and I made a sure thing of it. I've held my tongue for all my life, but I spoke out last night. I want her to be quit of you for good. I want her to go back to her husband. Yes, Mercedes, I've burst up the whole concern." Madame von Marwitz, her hand holding tightly the side of the car, and her eyes like large dark stones in her white face, was sitting upright and was staring at her. She could not speak, and Mrs. Talcott went on. "She knows all about you now, about you and Baldwin Tanner, and you and Ernst, and about that pitiful young Russian. She knows how you treated them. She knows how it wasn't you, but Ernst who was her real friend, and how you didn't want her to live with you. She knows that you're a mighty unfortunate creature, and a mighty dangerous one. And what I advise you to do, Mercedes, is to get out here and go right home. Karen won't ever come back to you again. I'm as sure of it as I'm sure my name's Hannah Talcott." They sped with softly singing speed through the chill morning air. The hard, tight, dark eyeballs still fixed themselves on the old woman almost lifelessly, and still she sat grasping the side of the car. She had the look of a creature shot through the heart, and maintaining the poise and pride of its startled and arrested life. Mechanical forces, rather than volition, seemed to sustain her. "Say, Mercedes, will you get out?" Mrs. Talcott repeated, and the rigid figure then moved its head slightly in negation. They reached the crossroads, where a few carts and an ancient fly stood waiting for the arrival of the omnibus that plied between the Lizard and Helston. Karen was nowhere to be seen. "Perhaps she went across the fields and got into the bus at the Lizard," said Mrs. Talcott. "We'll wait and see, and if she isn't in the bus, we'll go on to Helston. Perhaps she's walking." Madame von Marwitz continued to say nothing, and in a moment they heard behind them the clashing and creaking of the omnibus. It drew up at the halt, and Karen was not in it. "To Helston," said Mrs. Talcott, standing up to speak to the chauffeur. They sped on before the omnibus had resumed its journey. Tints of azure and purple crept over the moors. The whitening sky showed rifts of blue. It was a beautiful morning. Mrs. Talcott, keeping a keen eye on the surrounding country, became aware presently that Mercedes had turned her gaze upon her and was examining her. She looked round. There was no anger, no resentment even, on the pallid face. It seemed engaged, rather, in a deep perplexity, that of a child struck down by the hand that, till then, had cherished it. It brooded in sick wonder on Mrs. Talcott, and Mrs. Talcott looked back with her ancient, weary eyes. Madame von Marwitz broke the silence. She spoke in a toneless voice. "Tallie, how could you?" she said. "Oh, Tallie, how could you have told her?" "Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, gently but implacably, "I had to. It was right to make sure you shouldn't get hold of her again. She had to go, and she had to go for good. If you want me to go too, I will, but it's only fair to tell you that I never felt much sorrier for you than I do at this minute. There have been tragedies in my life," Madame von Marwitz went on, in a low, dulled voice. "I have been a passion-tossed woman. Yes, I have not been guiltless. But how could you cut out my heart, with all its scars, and show it to my child?" It was right to do it, Mercedes, so as you shouldn't ruin her life. She's not your child, and you've shown her she's not. A mother don't behave so to her child, however off her head she goes. I was mad last night." The tears ran slowly down Madame von Marwitz's cheeks. "I can tell that to Karen. I can explain. I can throw myself on her mercy. I loved him, and my heart was broken. One is not responsible. It is the animal wounded to death that shrieks and tears at the spear it feels entering its flesh. I'm awful sorry for you, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott. And now, hiding her head in her hands and leaning back in her cushions, Madame von Marwitz began to weep with the soft, reiterated sobbing of a miserable child. "I have no one left. I am alone," she sobbed. "Even you have turned against me." "No, I haven't turned against you," said Mrs. Talcott. "I'm here." And presently, while Mercedes wept, Mrs. Talcott took her hand and held it. They reached Helston and climbed the steep, stony road to the station. There was no sign of Karen. Mrs. Talcott got out and made inquiries. She might have gone to London by the train that left at dawn, but no one had noticed such a young lady. Mrs. Talcott came back to the car with her fruitless story. Mercedes, by this time, had dried her eyes and was regaining, apparently, her more normal energies. "Not here? Not seen? Not heard of?" she repeated. "But where is she, then?" Mrs. Talcott stood at the door of the car and looked at her charge. "Well, I'm afraid she made off in the night, straight away, after I'd talked to her." "Made off in the night?" A dark colour suddenly suffused Madame von Marwitz's face. "Yes, that's it, I reckon. I must have said something to scare her about going back to her husband. Perhaps she thought I'd bring him down without her knowing, and perhaps she wasn't far wrong. I'm afraid I've played the fool. She thought I'd round on her in some way, and so she just lit out." Madame von Marwitz stared at her. The expression of her face had entirely altered. There was no trace of the dazed and wretched child. Dark forces lit her eyes, and the relaxed lines of her lips tightened. "Get in," she commanded. "Tell him to drive back, and get in." And when Mrs. Talcott had taken her place beside her, she went on in a low, concentrated voice. "Is it not possible that she has joined that vile seducer?" Mrs. Talcott eyed her with the fixity of a lion tamer. Their moment of instinctive closeness had passed. "Now see here, Mercedes," she said. "I advise you to be careful what you say." "Careful? I am half mad. Between you all you will drive me mad," said Madame von Marwitz with intensity of fury. "You fill Karen's mind with lies about my past. Oh, there are two sides to every story. She shall hear my side. You drive her forth with your threats to hand her over to the man she loathes, and she takes refuge. Where else? With that miscreant. Why not? Where else had she to go? You say that she had no money. We call now at the hotel. If he is gone, and if within the day we do not hear that she is with Lise, we will send at once for detectives." "You'd better control yourself, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott. "If Karen ain't found, it'll be a mighty ugly story for you to face up to. And if she's found, it won't be all plain sailing for you either. You've got to pay the price for what you've done. But if it gets round that you drove her out, and then spread scandal about her, you'll do for yourself. Just keep your mind on that if you can." "Scandal? What scandal shall I spread? If he disappears, and she with him, will the facts not shriek aloud? If she is found, she will be found by me. I will wire at once to Lise." "We'll wire to Lise, and we'll wire to Mr. Jardine. That's what we'll do. Karen may have changed her mind. She may have felt shy of telling me she had. She may have come to see that he's the thing she's got to hang on to. What I hope for is that if she ain't in London already with him, she's hiding somewhere about here and has sent for him herself. Ah, I understand your hope. It is of a piece with all your treachery. said Madame von Marwitz, in a voice suffocated by conflicting angers. "If she is with her husband, he too will hear the story, the false, garbled story of my crimes. He is my enemy, you know it, my malignant enemy. You know that he will spread this affair broadcast, and you can rejoice in this. You are glad for my disgrace and ruin." Tears again streamed from her eyes. "Don't take on so, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott. "If Karen's with her husband, all they're likely to be thinking about is that he was right and has got her back again. Karen's bound to tell him something about what happened, and you can depend upon Karen for saying as little as she can. But if you imagine that you're going to be let off from being found out by that young man, you're letting yourself in for a big disappointment. And you can take my word for it. It's because he's right about you that Karen'll go back to him." Madame von Marwitz turned her head away and fixed her eyes on the landscape. They reached the little village near Les Solitudes, and at the little hotel, with its drowsy, out-of-season air, Mrs. Talcott descended, leaving Mercedes proudly seated in the car, indifferent to the possible gaze, from above, of her faithless devotee. Mrs. Talcott returned with the information that Mr. Drew was upstairs and not yet awake. Go up to him," said the tormented woman, after a moment of realized relief or disappointment. "Who can say? He may have seen her. He may have given her money for her journey. They may have arranged to meet later." Mrs. Talcott again disappeared, and she only returned after some 10 minutes. "Home," she then said to Burton, climbing heavily into the car. "Yes, there he was, sleeping as peaceful as a dormouse in his silk pajamas," she remarked. "I startled him some, I reckon, when I waked him up. No, he don't know anything about her. Wanted to jump up and look for her when I told him she was missing. Keep still, Mercedes. What do you mean by bouncing about like that? Folks can see you. I talked to him pretty short and sharp, that young man, and I told him the best thing he could do now was to pack his gripsack and clear out. He's going right away, and he promised to send me a telegram from London to-night. He can catch the second train." Madame von Marwitz leaned back. She closed her eyes. The car had climbed to the entrance of Les Solitudes, and the fuchsia hedge was passing on each side. Mrs. Talcott, looking at her companion, saw that she had either actually fainted or was simulating a very realistic fainting fit. Mercedes often had fainting fits at moments of crisis, but she was a robust woman, and Mrs. Talcott had no reason to believe that any of them had been genuine. She did not believe that this one was genuine, yet she had to own, looking at the leaden eyelids and ashen face, that Mercedes had been through enough in the last 12 hours to break down a stronger person. And it was appropriate that she should return to her desolate home in a prostrate condition. Mrs. Talcott, as often before, played her part. The maids were summoned. They supported Madame von Marwitz's body. Burton took her shoulders and Mrs. Talcott her feet. So the afflicted woman was carried into the house and upstairs and laid upon her bed. Mrs. Talcott then went and sent telegrams to Frau Lippheim and to Gregory Jardine. She asked them to let her know if Karen arrived in London during the day. She had her answers that evening. That from Gregory ran, "Not seen or heard of Karen. What has happened? Write by return, or shall I come to you?" The other was from the Lippheims' landlady, and said that the Lippheims had returned to Germany 4 days before, and that no one had arrived to see them. The evening post had gone. Mrs. Talcott went out and answered Gregory by wire. "Writing to-morrow morning. We think Karen is in London. Stay where you are." End of chapter 37. Chapter 38 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Johns, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 38. Mrs. Talcott went early to Madame von Marwitz's room next morning, as soon, in fact, as she had seen her breakfast tray carried away. She had shown Mercedes her telegrams the evening before, and Mercedes, lying on her bed where she had passed the day in heavy slumbers, had muttered, "Let me sleep. The post is gone. We can do nothing more till to-morrow." Like a wounded creature, she was regaining strength and wholeness in oblivion. When Mrs. Talcott had gone softly into her room at bedtime, she had found her soundly sleeping. But the fumes and torpors of grief and pain were this morning dispersed. Mercedes sat at the desk in her bedroom, attired in a robe de chambre, and rapidly and feverishly wrote. "I'm glad to see you're feeling better, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, closing the door and coming to her side. "We've got a lot to talk over this morning. I guess we'll have to send for those detectives. What are you writing there?" Madame von Marwitz, whose face had the sodden, slumbrous look that follows long repose, drew the paper quickly to one side and replied, "You may mind your affairs and leave me to mind my own. I write to my friend. I write to Mrs. Forrester." "You hand me that letter, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott, in a mild but singularly determined tone, and after a moment Madame von Marwitz did hand it to her. Mrs. Talcott perused the first page. Then she lifted her eyes to her companion, who, averting hers with a sullen look, fixed them on the sea outside. It was raining, and the sea was leaden. "Now just you listen to me, Mercedes Okraska," said Mrs. Talcott, heavily emphasizing her words, and leaning the hand that held the letter on the writing table. "I'll go straight up to London and tell the whole story to Mr. Jardine and Mrs. Forrester, the same as I told it to Karen, with all that's happened here besides. I will, as sure as my name's Hannah Talcott, if you write one word of that shameful idea to your friends. Lay down that pen." Madame von Marwitz did not lay it down, but she turned in her chair and confronted her accuser, though with averted eyes. "You say shameful. I say yes, shameful and true. She has not gone to her husband. She has not gone to the Lippheims. I believe that he has joined her. I believe that it was arranged. I believe that she is with him now." "You can't look me in the eye and say you believe it, Mercedes," said Mrs. Talcott. Madame von Marwitz looked her in the eye, sombrely, and then she varied her former statement. "He has pursued her. He has found her. He will try to keep her. He is a depraved and dangerous man." "We'll let him alone. We're done with him for good and all, I guess. My point is this, don't you write any lies to your friends, thinking that you're going to whiten yourself by blackening Karen. I'm speaking the sober truth when I say I'll go straight off to London and tell Mr. Jardine and Mrs. Forrester the whole story, unless you write a letter right now, as you sit here, that I can pass." Again averting her eyes, Madame von Marwitz clutched her pen in rigid fingers and sat silent. "It is blackmail, tyranny," she ejaculated presently. "All right, call it any name you like. But my advice to you, Mercedes, is to pull yourself together and see this thing straight for your own sake. I know what's the matter with you, you pitiful, silly thing. It's this young man. It makes you behave like a distracted creature. But don't you see as plain as can be that what Karen's probably done is to go to London, and that Mr. Jardine'll find her in a day or two. Now, when those two young people come together again, what kind of a story will Karen tell her husband about you? What'll he think of you? What'll your friends think of you, if they all find out that in addition to behaving like a wildcat to that poor child, because you were fairly daft with jealousy and driving her away, oh, yes, you did, Mercedes, it won't do any good to deny it now. If in addition to all that they find out that you've been trying to save your face by blackening her character, why, they'll think you're the meanest skunk that ever walked on two legs, and they'll be about right." Whereas Mercedes, Mrs. Talcott, had been standing square and erect for some time in front of her companion, And now, as her tone became more argumentative and persuasive, she allowed her tired old body to sag and rest heavily on one hip. Whereas, if you write a nice, kind, loving, self-reproachful letter, all full of your dreadful anxiety and affection, why, if Karen ever sees it, it'll soften her towards you, perhaps, and it'll make all your friends sorry for you, too, and inclined to hush things up, if Mr. Drew spreads the story around. Won't it, Mercedes?" Madame von Marwitz had turned in her chair and was staring before her with a deeply thoughtful eye. "Why, it's as plain as can be, Mercedes, that's your line." "True," Madame von Marwitz now said. "True." Her voice was deep and almost solemn. "You are right. Yes, you are right, Tallie." She leaned her forehead on her hand, shading her eyes as she pondered. "A letter of noble admission, of sorrow, of love. Ah, you recall me to my better self. It will touch her, Tallie. It is bound to touch her, is it not? She cannot feel the bitterness she now feels if she reads such a letter. Is not that so, Tallie?" "That's so. You've got it," said Mrs. Talcott. Madame von Marwitz, however, continued to lean on her desk and to shade her eyes, and some moments of silence passed thus. Then, as she leaned, the abjectness of her own position seemed suddenly borne in upon her. She pushed back her chair, and clutching the edge of the desk with both hands, gave a low cry. Mrs. Talcott looked at her, inquiring, but unmoved. "Oh, it is easy for you, standing there, watching my humiliation, making your terms," Madame von Marwitz exclaimed in bitter, trembling tones. "You see me in the dust, and it is you who strike me there. I am to drag myself, with precautions, apologies, to that child's feet, that waif, that bastard, that thing I picked up and made. I am to be glad because I may hope to move her to mercy. Ah, it is too much, too much. I curse the day that I saw her. I had a presentiment, I remember it now, as I saw her standing there in the forest with her foolish face. I felt in my inmost soul that she was to bring me sorrow. She takes him from me. She puts me to shame before the world. And I am to implore her to take pity on me?" She had extended her clenched hand in speaking, and now struck it violently on the desk. The silver blotter, the candlesticks, the pen tray and inkstand leaped in their places, and the ink, splashing up, splattered her white silk robe. "There now," said Mrs. Talcott, eyeing her impassively, "you've gone and spoiled your nice dress." "Damn the dress!" said Madame von Marwitz. Leaning her elbows on the desk and her face on her hands, she wept. The tears trickled between her fingers. But in a very little while the storm passed. She straightened herself, found her lace-edged handkerchief, and dried her eyes and cheeks. Then, taking a long breath, she drew forward a pad of paper. "I am a fool, am I not, Tallie?" she remarked. "And you are wise. A traitor, yet wise. I will do as you say. Wait there, and you shall see." Mrs. Talcott now subsided heavily into a chair, and for some 15 minutes there was no sound but the scratching of Madame von Marwitz's pen, and the deep sighs that from time to time she heaved. Then, "So, will that do?" she asked, leaning back with the deepest of the sighs and handing the pages to Mrs. Talcott. Her dark, cold eyes, all clouded with weeping, had a singularly childlike expression as she thus passed on her letter for inspection, and, as when she had stretched out her legs for Mrs. Talcott to put on her stockings, one saw beyond the instinctively confiding gesture a long series of scenes reaching back to childhood, scenes where, in crises, her own craft and violence and unscrupulous resource having undone her, she had fallen back in fundamental dependence on the one stable and inalienable figure in her life. Mrs. Talcott read: "My friend, dearest and best beloved, I am in the straits of a terrible grief. I am blind with weeping, dazed from a sleepless night and a day of anguish. My child, my Karen, is gone, and, oh, my friend, I am in part to blame. I am hot of blood, quick of tongue, as you know, and you know that Karen is haughty, resentful, unwilling to brook reproof even from me. But I do not attempt to exonerate myself. I will open my heart to you, and my friend will read aright and interpret the broken words. You know that I cared for Claude Drew. You guessed, perhaps, how strong was the hold upon me of the frail, ambiguous, yet so intelligent modern spirit. It was to feel the spring blossom once more on my frosty branches when this young life fell at my knees and seemed to find in me its source and goal. Mine was a sacred love, and pain mingled with my maternal tenderness when he revealed himself to me as seeking from me the lesser things of love, the things I could not give, that elemental soil of sense and passion, without which a man's devotion so strangely withers. I could give him water from the wells and light from the air. I could not give him earth. My friend, he was here when Karen came, and already I had seen it. His love was passing from me. Her youth, her guilelessness, her courage, and the loyalty of her return to me aroused his curiosity, his indolent and, you will remember, his unsatisfied passion. I saw at once, and I saw danger. I knew him to be a man believing in neither good nor evil, seeking only beauty and the satisfaction of desire. Not once, but twice, thrice did I warn Karen, and she resented my warnings. She is a creature profoundly pure and profoundly simple, and her stubborn spirit rests in security upon its own assurances. She resented my warnings, and she repulsed my attempts to lead and guard her. Another difference had also come between us. I hoped to effect a reconciliation between her and her husband. I suggested to Karen that I should write to you and offer myself as an intermediary. I could not bear to see her young life ruined for my sake. Karen was not kind to me. The thought of her husband is intolerable to her, and she turned upon me with bitterness. I was hurt, and I told her so. She brought me to tears. My friend, it was late on the night of that day, the night before last, when I found her with Claude Drew in the garden, and found her in his arms. Do not misunderstand. She had not returned his love. She repulsed him as I came upon them. But I, in my consternation, my anger, my dismay, snatched her from him, and spoke to them both with passionate reproof. I sent Karen to the house, and remained behind to deal with the creature who had so betrayed my trust. He is now my avowed enemy. So be it. I do not see him again. At dawn, after a sleepless night, I went to Karen's room to take her in my arms and to ask her pardon for my harsh words. She was gone. Gone, my friend. Tallie tells me that she believed me to have said that unless she could obey me, I must forbid her to remain under my roof. These were not my words, but she had misunderstood and had fiercely resented my displeasure. She told Tallie that she would go to the Lippheims. For them, as I have told you, she has a deep affection. Tallie urged upon her that she should communicate with her husband, let him know what had happened, return to him, even if it were to blacken me in his eyes. And would to God that it had been so! But she repulsed the suggestion with bitterness. It must also have filled her with terror lest we should ourselves make some further attempt to bring about a reconciliation. For it was in the night, and immediately after her talk with Tallie, that she went, although she and Tallie had arranged that she was to go to the Lippheims next day. We have wired to the Lippheims and find that they have left England, and we have wired to Mr. Jardine, and she is not with him. She may be on her way to Germany. She may be concealed in the country near here. She may be in London. Unless we have news of her tomorrow, I send for a detective. Oh, to hold her in my arms! I am crushed to the earth with sorrow and remorse. Show this letter to her husband. I have no thought of pride. Your devoted and unhappy Mercedes. Mrs. Talcott read and remained for some moments reflecting after she had read. Well, I suppose that's got to do, she commented. though I don't call it a satisfactory letter. You've fixed it up real smart, and it's a long way off the truth." Madame von Marwitz, while Mrs. Talcott read, had been putting back the disordered strands of her hair, adjusting her laces, and dabbing vaguely with her handkerchief at the splashes of ink that disfigured the front of her dress, thereby ruining the handkerchief. She looked up sharply now. "I deny that it is a long way off the truth." "A long way off," Mrs. Talcott repeated colourlessly. "But I guess it'll have to do. I'm willing you should make the best story out for yourself you can to your friends, so long as Karen knows the truth, and so long as you don't spread scandal about her. Now, I'll write to Mr. Jardine." Madame von Marwitz's eyes were still fixed sharply on her, and a sudden suspicion leaped to them. "Here, then," she exclaimed, "you write in my presence, as I have done in yours, and we go to the village together, that I may see you post the selfsame letter. I have had enough of betrayals." Mrs. Talcott allowed a grim smile to touch her lips. "My, but you're silly, Mercedes," she said. "Get up, then, and let me sit there. I'd just as lieve, I'm sure. You know I'm determined that Karen shall go back to her husband, and that I'm going to do all I can so as she shall. So there's nothing I want to hide." She took up the pen, and Madame von Marwitz leaned over her shoulder and read as she wrote. "Dear Mr. Jardine, Mercedes and Karen have had a disagreement, and Karen took it very hard, and has made off, we don't know where. Go round to Mrs. Forrester and see what Mercedes has got to say about it. Karen will tell you her side when you see her. She feels very bad about you yet, and thinks things are over between you. But you hang on, Mr. Jardine, and it'll all come right. You'd better find out whether Karen's called at the Lippheims, and get a detective and try and trace her out. If she's with them in Germany, I advise you to go right over and see her. Yours sincerely, Hannah Talcott." Mrs. Talcott, as she finished, heard that the breathing of Mercedes, close upon her, had become heavier. She did not look at her. She knew what Mercedes was feeling and dreading, and that Mercedes was helpless. "There's no reason under the sun why Hancock shouldn't take these letters as usual," she remarked. "But if you're set on it, that you're being betrayed, put on your shoes and dress, and we'll walk down and mail them together." End of chapter 38. Chapter 39 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 39. It was on the second morning after this that the letters were brought in to Madame von Marwitz, while she and Mrs. Talcott sat in the music room together. The 2 days had told upon them both. The face of Mercedes was like a beautiful fruit, rain-sodden and gnawed at the heart by a worm. Mrs. Talcott's was more bleached, more desolate, more austere. The one letter that Hancock brought to Mrs. Talcott was from Gregory Jardine. "Dear Mrs. Talcott," it said, "thank you for your kind note. I am very unhappy, and only a little less unhappy than when Karen left me. One cause of our estrangement is, perhaps, removed, but the fact borne in upon me at the time of that parting was that, while she was everything in life to me, she hardly knew the meaning of the words love and marriage. I need not tell you that I will do all in my power to induce her to return to me, and all in my power to win her heart. It was useless to make any attempt at reconciliation while her guardian stood between us. I cannot pretend that I feel more kindly towards Madame von Marwitz now. Rather the reverse. It is plain to me that she has treated Karen shamefully. You must forgive me for my frankness. Sincerely yours, Gregory Jardine." Mrs. Talcott, when she looked up from this letter, saw that Mercedes was absorbed in hers. Her expression had stiffened as she read, and when she had finished, the hand holding it dropped to her side. She sat looking down in a dark contemplation. Mrs. Talcott asked no question. United in the practical exigencies of their search for Karen, united in their indestructible relation of respective dependence and stability, which the last catastrophe had hardly touched, for Mercedes had accepted her betrayal with a singular passivity, as if it had been a force of nature that had overtaken her. There was yet a whole new region of distrust between them. She and Mercedes, as Mrs. Talcott cheerlessly imaged it, were like a constable and his captive adrift, by a curious turn of fortune, on the waters of a sudden inundation. Together they bailed out water and worked at the oar, but both were aware that when the present peril was past, a sentence had still to be carried out on one of them. Mercedes could not evade her punishment. If Karen were found, Gregory Jardine must come to know that her guardian had, literally, driven her from her home. In that case it rested with Gregory's sense of mercy whether Mercedes should be exposed to the world or not. And after reading Gregory's letter, Mrs. Talcott reflected that there was not much to hope of mercy from him. So she showed a tactful consideration of her companion's state of nerves by pressing her no further than was necessary. On this occasion, however, there was no need for pressure. Mercedes, in her dismal plight, turned to her with the latest development of it. "Ah," she said, while she still continued to gaze down fixedly, "this it is to have true friends. This is human loyalty. It is well." "What's the matter, Mercedes?" Mrs. Talcott asked, as she was evidently invited to do. "Read if you will," said Madame von Marwitz. She held out the letter which Mrs. Talcott rose to take. It was from Mrs. Forrester, and was full of sympathy for her afflicted friend, and full of sympathy for foolish, headstrong little Karen. The mingled sympathies rang strangely. She avowed self-reproach. She was afraid that she had precipitated the rupture between Karen and her husband, not quite, perhaps, understanding the facts. She had seen Gregory. She was very sorry for him. She was, apparently, sorry for everyone, except, of course, Mr. Drew, the villain of the piece. But of Mr. Drew and of Mercedes's sacred love for him she made no mention. Mrs. Forrester was fond, but she was wary. She had received, evidently, her dim thrust of disillusion. Mercedes had blamed herself, and Mrs. Forrester did not deny that Mercedes must be to blame. "Yes, she's feeling pretty sick," Mrs. Talcott commented when she had read. "The trouble is that everybody who knows how much Karen loved you knows that she wouldn't have made off like that without you'd treated her ugly. That'll be the trouble with most of your friends, I reckon. Who's your other letter from?" Madame von Marwitz roused herself from her state of contemplation. She opened the second letter, saying, tersely, "Scrotton." "She ain't likely to take sides with Karen," Mrs. Talcott observed, inserting her hand once more in the stocking she was darning. These homely occupations having for the last few days been brought into the music room, since Mercedes would not be left alone. She was always just as jealous of Karen as could be. She proceeded to darn, and Madame von Marwitz to read, and as she read a dark flush mounted to her face. Clenching her hand on Miss Scrotton's letter, she brought it down heavily on the back of the chair she sat in. Then, without speaking, she got up, tossed the letter to Mrs. Talcott, and began to pace the room, setting the furniture that she encountered out of her way with vindictive violence. "My darling, darling Mercedes," Miss Scrotton wrote, "this is too terrible. Shall I come to you at once? I thought this morning, after I had seen Mrs. Forrester and read your heart-breaking letter, that I would start to-day. But let me hear from you. You may be coming up to town. If you stay in Cornwall, Mercedes, you must not be alone. You must not. And I am, as you know, devoted heart and soul. If all the world turned against you, Mercedes, I should keep my faith in you. I need hardly tell you what is being said. Claude Drew is in London, and though naturally he does not dare face your friends with his story, rumours are abroad. Betty Jardine does not know him, but already she has heard. I met her only a few hours ago, and the miserable little creature was full of malicious satisfaction. The story that she has heard and believes, and that London will believe, is the crude, gross one that facts, so disastrously, have lent colour to. You, in a fit of furious jealousy, driving Karen away. My poor, great, suffering friend, I need not tell you that I understand. Your letter rings true to me in every line, and is but too magnanimous. Oh, Mercedes! Had you but listened to my warnings about that wretched man! Do you remember that I told you that you were scattering your pearls before swine? And your exculpation of Karen did not convince me, as it seemed to do Mrs. Forrester. A really guileless woman is not found, late at night, in a man's arms. I cannot forget Karen's origins. There must be in her the element of reckless passion. Mr. Drew is spreading a highly idolized account of her, and says that to see you together was to see Antigone in the clutches of Clytemnestra. There is some satisfaction in knowing that the miserable man is quite distracted, and is haunted by the idea that Karen may have committed suicide. Betty Jardine says that in that case you and he would have to appear at the inquest. Oh, my poor Mercedes! But I feel sure that this is impossible. Temper, not tragedy, drove Karen from you, and it was on her part a dastardly action. I am seeing everybody that I can. They shall have my version. The Duchess is in the country. I have wired to her that I will go to her at once, if you do not send for me. It is important that she should have the facts, as I see them, before these abominable rumours reach her. Dear Mrs. Forrester means, I am sure, to do loyally. You may count upon her to listen to no scandal. But its breath alarms and chills her. She does not interpret your letter as I do. Goodbye, my dear one. Wire to me, please, at once. Ever and always, ton Eleanor Devoe. Well, Mrs. Talcott commented warily, folding the letter and glancing at Madame von Marwitz. She don't let any grass grow under her feet, does she? Do you want her down? Want her? Why should I want her? The insufferable fool! Cried Madame von Marwitz, still striding to and fro with tigerish regularity. Does she think me too a fool to be taken in by her grimaces of loyalty, when it is as apparent as the day that delight is her chief emotion? Here is her opportunity. Parbleu! At last! I am in the dust, and if also in the dock, so much the better. She will stand by me when others fall away. She will defend the prostrate Titaness from the vultures that prey upon her, and gain at last the significance she has, for so long, so eagerly and so fruitlessly pursued. Ah, par exemple! Let her come to me expecting gratitude. I will spurn her from me like a dog. Madame von Marwitz, varying her course, struck a chair aside as she spoke. Well, I shouldn't fly out at her if I was you, said Mrs. Talcott. She's as silly as they make 'em, I allow, but it's all to the good if her silliness keeps her sticking to you through thick and thin. It's just as well to have someone around to drive off the vultures, even if it's only a scarecrow. And Miss Scrotton is better than that. She's a pretty brainy woman for all her silliness, and she's pretty fond of you too, only you haven't treated her as well as she thinks you ought to have, and it makes her feel kind of spry and cheerful to see that her time's come to show you what a fine fellow she is. Most folks are like that, I guess, Mrs. Talcott mused, returning to her stocking. They don't suffer so powerful over their friends' misfortunes if it gives them a chance of showing what fine fellows they are. Friends, Madame von Marwitz repeated with scorching emphasis. Friends! Truly I have proved them, these friends of mine. Cowards and traitors all, or crouching hounds. I am to be left, I perceive, with the Scrotton as my sole companion." But now she paused in her course, struck by a belated memory. "You had a letter. You have heard from the husband." "Yes, I have," said Mrs. Talcott, "and you may as well see it." She drew forth Gregory's letter from under the heap of darning appliances on her lap. Madame von Marwitz snatched it from her and read it, once rapidly, once slowly, and then, absorbed again in dark meditations, she stood holding it, her eyes fixed on the ground. "He ain't as violent as might be expected, is he?" Mrs. Talcott suggested. Distrust was abroad in the air between her and Mercedes. She offered the fact of Gregory's temperateness as one that might mitigate some anticipations. "He is as insolent as might be expected," said Madame von Marwitz. She flung the letter back to Mrs. Talcott, resuming her pacing, with a bitter laugh. "And to think," she said presently, "that I hoped, but truly hoped, with all my heart, to reconcile them. To think that I offered myself to Karen as an intermediary. It was true, yes, literally true, what I told Mrs. Forrester, that I spoke to Karen of it, with all love and gentleness, and that she turned upon me like a tigress." "And you'll recollect," said Mrs. Talcott, "that I told you to keep your hands off them, and that you'd made enough mischief as it was. Why, I guess you did hope she'd go back. You wanted to get rid of Karen and to have that young man to yourself. That's the truth, but you didn't tell that to Mrs. Forrester." "I deny it," said Madame von Marwitz, but mechanically. Her thoughts were elsewhere. She still paced. "Well," said Mrs. Talcott, "you'd better send that telegram to Miss Scrotton, telling her not to come, or you'll have her down here as soon as she's seen the Duchess." Send it at once," said Madame von Marwitz. "Tell her that I do not need her. Tell her that I will write." The force of her fury had passed. Counsels of discretion were making themselves felt. "Go at once and send it." She paused again as Mrs. Talcott rose. "If Karen is not found within 3 days, Tallie, I go to London. I believe that she is in London." Mrs. Talcott faced her. "If she's in London, she'll be found as soon by Mr. Jardine as by you." "Yes, that may be," said Mercedes. And discretion now had evidently the mastery. "But Karen will not refuse to see me. I must see her. I must implore her forgiveness. You would not oppose that, would you, Tallie?" "No, I'd not oppose your asking her to forgive you," Mrs. Talcott conceded, "when she's got back to her husband. Only I advise you to stay where you are till you hear she's found." "I will do as you say, Tallie," said Madame von Marwitz meekly. She went to the piano and seating herself began to play the Wohltemperirtes Clavier. End of chapter 39. Chapter 40 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 40. 6 days had passed since Karen's disappearance. The country had been searched. London still was being examined, and the papers were beginning to break into portraits of the missing girl. Karen became remote, non-existent, more than dead, it seemed, when her face, like that of some heroine of a newspaper novelette, gazed at one from the breakfast table. The first time that this happened, Madame von Marwitz, flinging the sheet from her, had burst into a violent storm of weeping. She sat on the afternoon of the 6th day in a sunny corner of the lower terrace and turned the leaves of a book with a listless hand. She was to be alone until dinner time. Tallie had gone into Helston by bus, and she had the air of one who feels solitude at once an oppression and a relief. She read little, raising her eyes to gaze unseeingly over the blue expanses stretched beneath her, or to look down as vaguely into the eyes of Victor, who lay at her feet. The restless spirit of the house had reached Victor. He lay with his head on his extended paws in an attitude of quiescence, but his ears were pricked to watchfulness. His eyes, as he turned them now and again up to his mistress, were troubled. Aware of his glance, on one occasion Madame von Marwitz stooped and caressed his head, murmuring, "Nous sommes des infortunes, hein, mon chien." Her voice was profoundly sad. Victor understood her. Slightly thudding his tail, he gave a soft, responsive groan. And it was then, while she still leaned to him and still caressed his head, that shrill, emphatic voices struck on Madame von Marwitz's ear. The gravelled nook where she sat, her garden chair and its adjusted cushions set against a wall, was linked by ascending paths and terraces to the cliff path, and this again, though only through a way overgrown with gorse and bramble, to the public coastguard's path along the cliff top. The white stones that marked the way for the coastguards made a wide detour behind Madame von Marwitz's property, and this nearer egress to the cliff was guarded by a large placard warning off trespassers. Yet, looking in the direction of the voices, Madame von Marwitz, to her astonishment, saw that 3 ladies, braving the interdict, were actually marching down in single file upon her. 1 was elderly and 2 were young. They wore travelling dress, and as she gazed at them in chill displeasure, the features of the first became dimly familiar to her. Where, she could not have said, yet she had seen that neat grey head before, that box-like hat with its depending veil, that firmly corseted matronly form, with its silver-set pouch, suggesting, typical of the travelling American lady as it was, a marsupial species. She did not know where she had seen this lady, but she was a travelling American. She accosted one in determined tones, and at some time in the past she had waylaid and inconvenienced her. Madame von Marwitz, as the 3 trooped down upon her, did not rise. She pointed to the lower terrace. "This is private property," she said, and her aspect might well have turned the unwary visitors, Acteon-like, into stags. "I must ask you to leave it at once. You see the small door in the garden wall below. It is unlocked, and it leads to the village. Good day to you." But, with a singularly bright and puckered look, the look of a surf-bather who measures with swift eye the height of the rolling breaker and plunges therein, the elderly lady addressed her with extraordinary volubility. "Baroness, you don't remember us, but we've met before. We have a mutual friend, Mrs. General Tolman of St. Paul's, Minnesota. Allow me to introduce myself again. Mrs. Slifer, Mrs. Hamilton K. Slifer, my girls Maud and Beatrice. We had the privilege of making your acquaintance over a year ago, Baroness, at the station in London, just before you sailed, and we had some talks on the steamer to that perfectly charming woman, Miss Scrotton. I hope she's well. We're over again this year, you see. We pine for dear old England and come just as often as we can. We feel we belong here more than over there sometimes, I'm afraid." Mrs. Slifer laughed swiftly and deprecatingly. "My girls are so often taken for English girls, the Burne-Jones type, you know. We've got friends staying at Mullion, so we thought we'd just drop down on Cornwall for a little tour after we landed at Southampton, and we drove over this afternoon and came down by the cliff. We are just crazy about your scenery, Baroness, and it's just the right setting for you. We've been saying so all day, to have a peek at the house we've heard so much about. And we don't want to disturb you, but it's the greatest possible pleasure, Baroness, to have this beautiful glimpse of you, with your splendid dog. How do you do, Victor? Why, I do believe he remembers me. We petted him so much at the station when your niece was holding him. We saw Mrs. Jardine the other day, Baroness. Such a pleasant surprise that was, too, only we're sorry to see she's so delicate. The New Forest will be just the place for her. We stayed there 3 days after landing, because my Beatrice here was very seasick, and I wanted her to have a little rest. We were simply crazy over it. I do hope Mrs. Jardine's getting better." All this had been delivered with such speed, such an air of decision and purpose, that Madame von Marwitz, who had risen in her bewildered indignation and stood, her book beneath her arm, her white cloak caught about her, had found no opportunity to check the torrent of speech, and as these last words came as swiftly and as casually as the rest, she could hardly, for a moment, collect her faculties. "My niece, Mrs. Jardine," she repeated, with a wild, wan utterance. "What do you say of her?" It was at this moment that Miss Beatrice began, in the background, to adjust her camera. She told her mother and sister afterwards that she seemed to feel it in her bones that something was doing. Mrs. Slifer, emerging from her breaker in triumph, struck out, blinking and smiling affably. "We heard all about the wedding in America," she said, "and we thought we might call upon her in London and see that splendid temple you'd given her. We heard all about that, too. I never saw a picture of him, but I knew her in a minute, naturally, though she did look so pulled down. Why, Baroness, what's the matter?" Madame von Marwitz had suddenly clutched Mrs. Slifer's arm with an almost appalling violence of mien and gesture. "What is the matter?" Madame von Marwitz repeated, shaking Mrs. Slifer's arm. "Do you know what you are saying? My niece has been lost for a week. The whole country is searching for her. Where have you seen her? When was it? Answer me at once." "Why, Baroness, by all means, but you needn't shake my head off," said Mrs. Slifer, not without dignity, raising her free hand to straighten her hat. "We've never heard a word about it. Why, this is perfectly providential, Baroness. I must ask you not to go on shaking me like that. I've got a very delicate stomach, and the least thing upsets my digestion." "Juste cieux," Madame von Marwitz cried, dropping Mrs. Slifer's arm and raising her hands to her head, while in the background Miss Beatrice's kodak gave a click. "Will the woman drive me mad? Karen, my child, where is she?" "Why, we saw her at the station at Brockenhurst, in the New Forest, didn't we, Maud?" said Miss Slifer. "And it must have been, now let me see," poor Mrs. Slifer collected her wits, a bent forefinger at her lips. "Today's Thursday, and we got to Mullion yesterday, and we stopped at Winchester for a day and night on our way to the New Forest. It was on Saturday last, of course. We'd been having a drive about that part of the forest, and we were taking the train, and they had just come and we saw them on the opposite platform. He was just helping her out of the train, and we didn't have any time to go round and speak to them." "They!" Madame von Marwitz nearly shouted. "She was with a man? Last Saturday? Who was it? Describe him to me. Was he slender, with fair hair, dark eyes, the air of a poet?" she panted. And her aspect was so singular that Miss Beatrice, startled out of her professional readiness, failed to snap it. "Why, no," said Mrs. Slifer, keeping her clue. "I shouldn't say a poetical looking man, should you, Maud? A fleshy man, very big and fleshy, and he was taking such good care of her and looked so kind of tender and worried that I concluded he was her husband. She looked like a very sick woman, Baroness." "Fleshy," Madame von Marwitz repeated, and the word in her moan was almost graceful. "Fleshy, you say? An old man? A stout old man?" She held her hands distractedly pressed to her head. What stout old man does Karen know? Is it a stranger she has met? No, he wasn't old. This was a young man, Baroness. He had, now let me see, his hair was sort of red. I remember noticing his hair. And he wore knee pants and a soft hat with a feather in it, and was very highly coloured. "Bon Dieu!" Madame von Marwitz gasped. She had again, while Mrs. Slifer spoke, seized her by the arm, as though afraid that she might escape her, and she now gazed with a fixed gaze above Mrs. Slifer's head, and through the absorbed Maud and Beatrice. "Red hair? A large young man? Was he clean shaven? Did he wear eyeglasses? Had he the face of a musician? Did he look like an Englishman? An English gentleman? Mrs. Slifer, nodding earnest assent to the first questions, shook her head at the latter. No, he didn't. What I said to Maud and Beatrice was, that Mr. Jardine looked more German than English. He looked just like a German student, Baroness." "Franz Lippheim!" cried Madame von Marwitz. She sank back upon the seat from which she had risen, putting a hand before her eyes. Victor, at her knees, laid a paw upon her lap, and whined an interrogative sympathy. The three American ladies gathered near and gazed in silence upon the great woman, and Beatrice, carefully adjusting her camera, again took a snap. The picture of Madame von Marwitz, with her hand before her eyes, her anxious dog at her knees, found its way into the American press, and illustrated touchingly the story of the lost adopted child. Madame von Marwitz was not sorry when, among a batch of press cuttings, she came across the photograph, and saw that her most genuine emotion had been thus made public. She looked up at last, and the dizziness of untried and perilous freedom was in her eyes. But curious now of other objects they took in, weighed and measured the little group before her. Power grew in them, an upwelling of force and strategy. She smiled upon the Slifers, and she rose. "You have done me an immeasurable service," she said, and as she spoke she took Mrs. Slifer's hand with a noble dignity. "You have lifted me from despair. It is blessed news that you bring. My child is safe with a good, a talented man, one for whom I have the deepest affection, and in the New Forest at Brockenhurst on Saturday. Ah, I shall soon have her in my arms." Still holding Mrs. Slifer's hand, she led them up the terraces and towards the house. "The poor child is ill, distraught. She had parted from her husband, fled from him. Ah, it has been a miserable affair, that marriage. But now all will be well. Bon Dieu! What joy, what peace of heart you have brought me. I shall be with her to-morrow. I start at once. And you, my good friends, let me hear your plans. Let me be of service to you. Come with me for the last stage of your journey. I will not part with you willingly." "It's all simply too wonderful, Baroness," Mrs. Slifer gasped, as she skipped along on her short legs beside the goddess-like stride of the great woman, who held her very tightly. "We were just going to drift along up to Tintagel, and then work up to London, taking in all the cathedrals we could on our way." "And you will change your route in order to give me the pleasure of your company. You will forfeit Tintagel, is it not so?" Madame von Marwitz smiled divinely. "You will come with me in my car to Truro, where we take the train, and I will drop you to-night at the feet of a cathedral. So, your luggage is at Mullion? That is simple. We wire to your friends to pack and send it on at once. Leave it to me. You are in my hands. It is a kindness that you will do me. I need you, Mrs. Slifer." She pressed the lady's arm. "My old friend who lives with me has left me for the day, and moreover she is too old to travel. I must not be alone. I need you. It is a kindness that you will do me. Now you will wait for me here, and tea will be brought to you. I shall keep you waiting but for a few moments." It was to be lifted on the back of a genie. She had wafted them up, along the garden paths, across the veranda, into the serenity and spaciousness and dim whites and greens and silvers of the great music room, with a backward gaze that had, in all its sweetness, something of hypnotic force and fixity. She left them with the sergeant portrait looking down at them, and the room in its strangeness and beauty seemed part of the spell she laid upon them. The Slifers, herded together in the middle of it, gazed about them half awestruck, and spoke almost in whispers. "Why, girls," said Mrs. Slifer, who was the first to find words, "this is the most thrilling thing I ever came across." "You've pulled it off this time, mother, and no mistake," said Maud, glancing somewhat furtively up at the sergeant. "Do look at that perfectly lovely dress she has on in that picture. Did you ever see such pearls? And the eyes seem to follow you, don't they?" "The poor distracted thing just clings to us," said Mrs. Slifer. "I shouldn't wonder if she was as lonely as could be." All the same, Beatrice, the doubting Thomas of the group, now commented, "I don't think however excited she was, she ought to have shaken you like that, mother." Beatrice had examined the appurtenances of the great room with a touch of nonchalance. It was she whom Gregory had seen at the station seated on the pile of luggage. "That's petty of you, Bee," said Mrs. Slifer gravely. "Real small and petty. It's a great soul at white heat we've been looking at." Handcock at this point brought in tea, and after she had placed the tray and disposed the plates of cake and bread and butter and left the Slifers alone again, Mrs. Slifer went on under her breath, seating herself to pour out the tea. "And do look at this teapot, girls. Isn't it too cute for words? My, what will the Joneses say when they hear about this? They'd give their eye teeth to be with us now." The Slifers, indeed, were never to forget their adventure. It was to be impressed upon their minds not only by its supreme enviableness, but by its supreme discomfort. It was almost 5 when, like 3 Ganymedes uplifted by the talons of a fierce, bright bird, they soared with Madame von Marwitz towards Truro, and at Truro, in spite of a reckless speed which desperately dishevelled their hair and hats, they arrived too late to catch the 6:40 train for Exeter. Madame von Marwitz strode majestically along the platform, her white cloak trailing in the dust, called for station masters, demanded special trains, fixed haughty, uncomprehending eyes upon the officials, who informed her that she could not possibly get a train until 10, resigned herself, with sundry exclamations of indignation and stamps of the foot, to the tedious wait, sailed into the refreshment room only to sail out again, mounted the car not yet dismissed, bore the Slifers to a hotel where they had a dinner over which she murmured at intervals, "Bon Dieu, est-ce donc possible?" and then, in the chill dark evening, toured about in the adjacent country until 10, when Burton was sent back to Les Solitudes, and when they all got into the train for Exeter. She had never in all her life travelled alone before. She hardly knew how to procure her ticket, and her helplessness in regard to box and dressing case was so apparent that Mrs. Slifer saw to the one and Maud carried the other, together with the fur-lined coat when this was thrown aside. The hours that they passed with her in the train were the strangest that the Slifers had ever passed. They were chilled, they were sleepy, they were utterly exhausted, but they kept their eyes fixed on the perplexing, resplendent object that upbore them. Beatrice, it is true, showed by degrees a slight sulkiness. She had not liked it when, at Truro, Madame von Marwitz had supervised their wires to the Joneses, and she liked it less when Madame von Marwitz explained to them in the train that she relied upon them not to let the Joneses, or anybody for the present, know anything about Mrs. Jardine. Something in Madame von Marwitz's low-toned and richly murmured confidences, as she told Maud and Mrs. Slifer that it was important for Mrs. Jardine's peace of mind, and for her very sanity, that her dreaded husband should not hear of her whereabouts, made Beatrice, as she expressed it to herself, tired. She looked out of the window while her mother and sister murmured, "Why, certainly, Baroness. Why, yes, we perfectly understand," leaning forward in the illuminated carriage like docile conspirators. After this, Madame von Marwitz said that she would try to sleep, but propped in her corner she complained so piteously of discomfort that Mrs. Slifer and Maud finally divested themselves of their jackets and contrived a pillow for her out of them. They assured her that they were not cold, and Madame von Marwitz, reclining now at full length, murmured "Mille remerciements." Soon she fell asleep, and Mrs. Slifer and Maud, very cold and very unresentful, sat and watched her slumbers. From time to time she softly snored. She was very comfortable in her fur-lined cloak. It was 1 o'clock when they reached Exeter, and drove, dazed and numbed, to a hotel. Here Madame von Marwitz further availed herself of the services of Maud and Mrs. Slifer, for she was incapable of unpacking her box and dressing case. Mrs. Slifer maided her, while Maud, with difficulty at the late hour, procured her hot water, bouillon, and toast. Beatrice, meanwhile, callously avowing her unworthiness, said that she was dead tired, and went to bed. Madame von Marwitz bade Mrs. Slifer and Maud the kindest good night, smiling dimly at them over her bedroom candlestick as she ushered them to the door. "So," she said, "I leave you to your cathedral." When the Slifers arose next day, late, for they were very weary, they found that Madame von Marwitz had departed by an early train. Meanwhile, at Les Solitudes, old Mrs. Talcott turned from side to side all night, sleepless. Her heart was heavy with anxiety. Karen was found, and tomorrow Mercedes would be with her. She had sent for Mercedes, so the note pinned to Mrs. Talcott's dressing table had informed her, and Mercedes would write. What had happened? Who were the unknown ladies who had appeared from no one knew where, during her absence at Helston, and departed with Mercedes for Truro? Something's wrong. Something's wrong. Mrs. Talcott muttered to herself during the long hours. I don't believe she sent for Mercedes, not unless she's gone crazy. At dawn she fell at last into an uneasy sleep. She dreamed that she and Mercedes were walking in the streets of Cracow, and Mercedes was a little child. She jumped beside Mrs. Talcott, holding her by the hand. The scene was innocent, yet the presage of disaster filled it with a strange horror. Mrs. Talcott woke bathed in sweat. "I'll get an answer to my telegram this morning," she said to herself. She had telegraphed to Gregory last night at once. Karen is found. Mercedes has gone to her. That's all I know yet. She clung to the thought of Gregory's answer. Perhaps he too had news. But she had no answer to her telegram. The post instead brought her a letter from Gregory that had been written the morning before. Dear Mrs. Talcott, it ran, Karen is found. The detectives discovered that Mr. Franz Lippheim had not gone to Germany with his family. They traced him to an inn in the New Forest. Karen is with him and has taken his name. May I ask you, if possible, to keep this fact from her guardian for the present? Yours sincerely, Gregory Jardine. When Mrs. Talcott had read this, she felt herself overcome by a sudden sickness and trembling. She had not yet well recovered from her illness of the spring. She crept upstairs to her room and went to bed. End of chapter 40. Chapter 41 of Tante. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Recording by Dion Gines, Salt Lake City, Utah. Tante by Anne Douglas Sedgwick. Chapter 41. It seemed to Karen, after hours had passed, that she had ceased to be tired, and that her body, wafted by an involuntary rhythm, was as light as thistledown on the wind. She had crossed the Goonhilly Downs, where the moonlight, spreading far and wide with vast unearthly brightness, filled all the vision with immensities of space, and brought memories of strains from Schubert's symphonies, silver monotonies of never-ending sound. She had plunged down winding roads, blackly shadowed by their hedgerow trees, passing sometimes a cottage that slept between its clumps of fuchsia and veronica. She had climbed bare hillsides, where abandoned mines or quarries had left desolate mementos that looked in the moonlight like ancient tombs and catacombs. Horror lay behind her at Les Solitudes, a long, low cloud on the horizon to which she had turned her back. The misery that had overpowered and made her one with its dread realities lay beneath her feet. She was lifted above it in a strange, disembodied enfranchisement all the night, and the steady blowing of the wind, the leagues of silver, the mighty sky with its far, high priestess, were part of an ecstasy of sadness, impersonal, serene, hallucinated, like that of the music that accompanied the rhythm of her feet. The night was almost over, and dawn was coming, when on a long uphill road she felt her heart flag and her footsteps stagger. The moon still rode sharp and high, but its light seemed concentrated in its own glittering disk, and the world was visible in an uncanny darkness that was not dark. The magic of the night had vanished, and the beat of vast, winding melodies melted from Karen's mind, leaving her dry and brittle and empty, like a shell from which the tides have drawn away. She knew what she had still to do. At the top of the road she was to turn and cut across fields to a headland above Falmouth, from which a path she knew led to the town. She had not gone to Helston, but had taken this cross-country way to Falmouth because she knew that at any hour of the night she might be missed and followed and captured. They would not think of Falmouth. They would not dream that she could walk so far. In the town she would pawn Uncle Ernst's watch and take the early train to London, and by evening she would be with Frau Lippheim. So she had seen it all, in flashes, last night. But now, toiling up the interminable road, clots of darkness floating before her eyes, cold sweat standing on her forehead, the sense of her exhaustion crushed down upon her. She tried to fix her thoughts on the trivial memories and forecasts that danced in her mind. The odd blinking of Mrs. Talcott's eyelid as she had told her story. The pattern of the breakfast set that she and Gregory had used. Ah, no, not that. She must not fix that memory. The roofs and chimneys of some little German town where she was to find a refuge. For though it was to join the Lippheims that she fled, she did not see her life as led with theirs. Leaning upon these pictures, as if upon a staff she held, she reached the hilltop. Her head now seemed to dance like a balloon, buffeted by the great throbs of her blood. She trailed with leaden feet across the fields. In the last high meadow she paused and looked down at the bend of the great bay under the pallid sky, and at the town lying like a scattering of shells along its edge. How distant it was, how like a mirage. A little tree was beside her, and its leaves in the uncanny light looked like crisp black metal. The sea was grey. The sunrise was still far off. Karen sank beneath the tree and leaned her head against it. What should she do if she were unable to walk on? There was still time, hours and hours of time, till the train left Falmouth. But how was she to reach Falmouth? Fears rolled in upon her like dark breakers, heaping themselves one upon the other, stealthy, swift, not to be escaped. She saw the horrible kindness in Mrs. Talcott's eyes, relegated, not relinquished. She saw herself pursued, entrapped, confronted by Gregory, equally entrapped, forced by her need, her helplessness, to come to her and coldly determined, as she had seen him on that dreadful evening of their parting, to do his duty by her, to make her and to keep her safe, and his own dignity secure. To see him again, to strive against him again, weaponless now, without refuge, and reveal to herself and to him as a creature whose whole life had been founded on illusion, to strive not only against his ironic authority, but, worst of all, against a longing, unavowed, unlooked at, a longing that crippled and unstrung her, and that ran under everything like a hidden river under granite hills. She would die, she felt, rather than endure it. She had closed her eyes as she leaned her head against the tree, and when she opened them she saw that the leaves of the tree had turned from black to green, and that the grass was green, and the sea and sky faintly blue. Above her head the long carved ripples of the morning cirri flushed with a heavenly pink, and there came from a thicket of a little wood the first soft whistle of a wakened bird. Another came, and then another, and suddenly the air was full of an almost jangling sweetness. Karen felt herself trembling. Shudders ran over her. She was ravished to life, yet without the answering power of life. Her longing, her loneliness, her fear, were part of the intolerable loveliness, and they pierced her through and through. She struggled to her feet, holding the tree in her clasp, and after the galvanized effort, She closed her eyes again, and again leaned her head upon the bark. Then it was that she heard footsteps, sudden footsteps, near. For a moment a paralysis of fear held down her eyelids. "Ach Gott!" she heard, and before her eyes she saw Franz Lippheim before her. Franz Lippheim was dressed, very strangely dressed, in tweeds and knickerbockers, and wore a soft round hat with a quill in it, the oddest of hats, and had a knapsack on his back. The colours of the coming day were caricatured in his ruddy face and red gold hair, his bright green stockings and bright red tie. He was Germanic, flagrant, incredible, and a Perseus, an undreamed of, God-sent Perseus. "Ah, God! Can it be so?" he was saying as he approached her, walking softly as though in fear of dispersing a vision. And as, not speaking, still clasping her tree, she held out her hand to him, he saw the extremity of her exhaustion and put his arm around her. She did not faint. She kept her consciousness of the blue sky and the cirri, golden now, and even of Franz's tie and eyeglasses, glistening golden in the rising sunlight. But he had lowered her gently to the ground, kneeling beside her, and was supporting her shoulders and putting brandy to her lips. After a little while he made her drink some milk, and then she could speak to him. She must speak, and she must tell him that she had left her guardian. She must speak of Tante. But what to say of her? The shame and pity that had gone with her for days laid their fingers on her lips as she thought of Tante and why she had left her. Her mind groped for some availing substitute. "Franz," she said, "you must help me. I have left Tante. You will not question me. There is a breach between us. She has been unkind to me. I can never see her again." And now with clearer thought she found a sufficient truth. She has not understood about me and my husband. She has tried to make me go back to him, and I have fled from her because I was afraid that she would send for him. She is not as fond of me as I thought she was, Franz, and I was a burden to her when I came. Franz, will you take me to London? To your mother? I am going with you all to Germany. I am going to earn my living there." "Du lieber Gott!" Herr Lippheim ejaculated. He stared at Karen in consternation. "Our great lady, our great Tante, has been unkind to you? Is it then possible, Karen?" "Yes, Franz, you must believe me. You must not question me." "Trust me, my Karen," said Herr Lippheim. "Now, do not fear. It shall be as you say. But I cannot take you to the Mutterchen in London, for she is not there. They have gone back to Germany, Karen, and it is to Germany that we must go. Can you take me there, Franz, at once? I have no money, but I am going to pawn this watch that Uncle Ernst gave me." "That is all simple, my Karen. I have money. I took with me the money for my tour. I was on a walking tour, do you see, and reached Falmouth last night, and had but started now to pay my respects at Les Solitudes. I wished to see you, Karen, and to see if you were well. But it is very far to your village. How have you come so far at night?" "I walked. I have walked all night. I am so tired, Franz, so tired. I do not know how I shall go any further." She closed her eyes. Her head rested against his shoulder. Franz Lippheim looked down at her with an infinite compassion and gentleness. "It will all be well, my Karen. Do not fear," he said. "The train does not go from Falmouth for 3 hours still. We will take it then and go to Southampton and sail for Germany to-night. And for now you will drink this milk. So, yes, that is well. And eat this chocolate. You cannot. It will be for later then. And you will lie still with my cloak around you, so, and you will sleep. And I will sit beside you, and you will have no troubled thoughts. You are with your friends, my Karen." While he spoke he had wrapped her round and laid her head softly on a folded garment that he drew from his knapsack, and in a few moments he saw that she slept, the profound sleep of complete exhaustion. Franz Lippheim sat above her, not daring to light his pipe for fear of waking her. He watched the glory of the sunrise. It was perhaps the most wonderful hour in Franz's life. Phrases of splendid music passed through his mind, mingling with the sound of the sea. No personal pain and no personal hope was in his heart. He was uplifted, translated, with the beauty of the hour and its significance. Karen needed him. Karen was to come to them. He was to see her henceforward in his life. He was to guard and help her. He was her friend. The splendor and the peace of the golden sky and golden sea were the angels of a great initiation. Nothing could henceforth be as it had been. His brain stirred with exquisite intuitions, finding form for them in the loved music that, henceforth, he would play as he had never before played it. And when he looked from the sea and sky down at the sleeping face beside him, wasted and drawn and piteous in its repose, large tears rose in his eyes and flowed down his cheeks, and the sadness was more beautiful than any joy that he had known. What she had suffered, the dear one, what they must help her to forget! To her also the hour would send its angels. She would wake to a new life. He turned his eyes again to the rising sun, and his heart silently chanted its love and pride and sadness in the phrases of Beethoven, of Schubert, and of Brahms, and from time to time, softly, he muttered to himself, this stout young German Jew, with the red necktie and the strange round hat, "Süßes Kind, unglückliches Kind, oh, der schöne Tag." End of chapter 41.